Good evening, everyone. It's going to be a long evening this evening. We have lots to get to take care of, so let's get started. I'd like to call the June 8th meeting of the Committee of the Whole to order and acknowledge that meeting is taking place on unceded Algonquin territories. I would like to thank the Algonquin nations for hosting this meeting on their land. And with that, I would like to call for a mover to approve the agenda. Trustee Blackburn, thank you very much. And are there any changes to the agenda? Trustee Fisher.
Thanks, Keith. I'm wondering off the top of the agenda, if the board would indulge me, if the board participated in a moment of silence to recognize the terrible tragedy and acts in London this week.
Certainly we could. When would you like to do that, Trustee Fisher?
Well, I think off the top of the meeting would be appropriate.
All right. Any further updates to the agenda? Seeing none, I'd like to call the question on the agenda. All those in favor? Oh, Trustee Huff, was that a vote to approve the agenda?
We would actually comment. I'm wondering if we might be a little ambitious in our agenda this evening, and I'm wondering if this is the point that we might want to discuss whether we move one of the two reports that we will be tabling to another evening. I just thought we should have some discussion on that, perhaps.
All right. So, what report? What are you exactly suggesting, Trustee Huff? Which report, and what did you want to do with it?
So I'm trying to get that up to give you the number for the report. The second report is Superintendent Kawaja's report following the discussion of the SRO.
Right. So that's report 21-046, item 9.2. And you're suggesting that it be postponed or removed from this meeting, are you?
I would like to see it move forward to next week, if possible, to another date and time, so that we can give the appropriate amount of respect and time for that very important report. Okay, so Trustee Huff has moved that we postpone item 9.2, report 21-046. Is there any discussion on that? Trustee Campbell?
Yes, thank you. The police involvement in the schools report, not just an SRO report, I think does need a good discussion and airing in time. But we may find that we have time towards the end of the meeting to, if not complete, at least start other agenda items. If we need a continuation meeting, we need a continuation meeting, but I guess I'm not going to assume that we won't finish the business. I agree we shouldn't be rushed through the first item. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Alara.
Yeah, I'm with Rob. I think that if we get to it, we get to it. If we don't, we have a continuation meeting, but I don't want to push it off the agenda and then end at 9:30 just because we got through the SRO and police involvement report sooner.
Thank you very much. Trustee Bell?
I just want to add and support Wendy's motion in noting that the material that we're about to hear quite a bit about is somewhat traumatic and emotional. And so I would therefore, even if it does only take us to 9:30, I think the content itself will be heavy enough to be enough for this agenda. Thanks.
Okay, so the proposal is to remove or postpone item 9.2 to a further meeting. Executive Officer Giroux, do I call a vote on that particular item? Yes, okay. So all those in favor of postponing item 9.2 as per Trustee Huff's direction?
Trustee Blackburn had her hand up.
Oh, sorry. I didn't see that. Trustee Blackburn, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question would be, postpone it to when?
So that what happens there, Trustee Blackburn, is it then goes back to agenda planning tomorrow and we'll find a suitable date if it's postponed?
So we're talking about the fall. I see
We're
the
talking,
director.
that is a possibility, Trustee Blackburn, yeah.
Okay, because that's fine if it's not time sensitive, but I'm not for having loading on more meetings in June. We already have quite enough.
Yeah, I'm told that it's not time sensitive, Trustee Blackburn, so.
Thank you.
And I believe I also saw Trustee Fisher's hand up. Go ahead.
No,
You're
Keith, I've been raising my hand and lowering it because I thought we were voting. So
Sorry about that. My mistake. All right, so all those in favor of Trustee Huff's motion to postpone item 9.2 to a further meeting? And opposed? So thank you very much. I have 7 in favor, 5 opposed. So the motion passes. Item 9.2 is postponed. Are there any other changes to the agenda proposed? And seeing none, I'd like to call the question on the agenda. All those in favor of the agenda as amended? Thank you very much. That passes. And as per Trustee Fisher's request, why don't we have just a moment of silence for the tragic events in London, Ontario. And thank you very much, trustees. And we're moving on to the item 3, which is delegations. And I'd just like to note that in response to very strong public interest in the subject matter of one of the subject matters of this evening's meeting and interest to delegate, we've expanded our agenda to include both oral and written delegations. The committee will hear from 12 delegations this evening during this meeting, but we will also be receiving additional written delegations that are included in the agenda materials. We had to ensure the addition of this so that we can have a broad public consultation process and are able to receive submissions from many voices and still ensure that we have a balance and have sufficient time for an important discussion as part of tonight's agenda. So I'd like to call upon the delegations to make their presentation and remind them that once they have made their delegation, they should leave the meeting, and I would encourage you to watch on live stream. So we have 1 4-minute delegation and 11 2-minute delegations. And so we will start with May Mason. And do I see May Mason on the screen?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can see you.
Perfect.
Thank you very much. You have 4 minutes for your delegation. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm an alumna of the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board. I also have a sibling that still goes to Ottawa-Carleton District School Board. I'm here to demand that Ottawa-Carleton District School Board implements the recommendations put forward by their own review. Back in August of 2020, Trustee Sandra Schwartz was quoted, "I want to make sure that we're not eliminating a position that many have told me has been invaluable to the community before we actually conduct an appropriate and fulsome review of the position and of the program." Well, according to the review requested by the board and facilitated by the board to their own cost, the SRO program has actually proven to be invaluable to the discrimination, criminalization, and exclusion of Black, Indigenous, and students of color within their scholastic careers at OCDSB. Therefore, for all who voted last year for this review, you will be failing these students if you choose to ignore your review's own recommendations. It is high time for you to support what community members have been saying for years by following up on the review's solid evidence that cops in school is an abuse of human rights and equity. For an actual equitable learning environment, police presence needs to be eliminated, reduced to the legal mandates of the provincial mandate at bare minimum. Correct the OCDSB policy to match provincial mandates in the interim that the provincial mandate is actually abolished through community advocacy. I am also a member of a SELU collective, a grassroots collective that has been campaigning to remove police from schools for over the past year. Following the voices of community members who have been fighting for this since the SRO's inception. We are committed to amplifying these voices, and that is exactly what our report has done. Unsurprisingly, our report also supports and expands upon the findings of OCDSB's review, due to both reports being hinged on community consultations. I worked intimately with these shared by those who contributed from the community, and these stories represent 125 students. Some of the main themes that were consistent with OCDSB's findings were that SROs impact mental health and academic success of racialized youth. They perpetuate rape culture and influence the school to prison pipeline. Our report also incorporated student editors because we are committed to empowering student voices and valuing them, something this board needs to keep centered in their discussions and decisions today. It is important that those most negatively impacted by systemic racism, rape culture, and other harmful power imbalances are given agency in the steps taken moving forward to heal their learning environments. Directly from ASILA's report, reallocate all student board funds from the school resource officer program and school policing structures towards support for students. Our report outlines this in more detail and includes needs students have identified themselves, like peer support groups, access to mental health counselors, and transformative justice conflict resolution that actually solves root problems instead of just disappearing people from the school grounds. In ASILA's recommendations, it advises the school board that they should dismantle all forms of policing structures and prohibit reallocation of funds to be funneled back into surveillance systems or security forces. This includes identifying how biases and practices of admin and other staff uphold policing and punitive structures within their classrooms and schools to rectify that. We need to deprioritize punitive and policing systems. This means taking concrete actions that center, care, and empower students instead of treating them as nefarious, incapable, and inferior participants within their school due to their race, sexuality, and/or gender. We need to immediately terminate the SRO program and explicitly prohibit any future use of comparable programs structured in this reformist framework. All in all, we need to ask each other, why are these students harming each other? What has the community done to fail these students? How can we center the voices of those who've been devalued? And lastly, we need to do better. And you trustees, you hold the power to make one huge and commendable step towards a better future by following your own review and ending the SRO program. No cops in school.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mason. And we have we are allowed up to 3 questions of clarification amongst the trustees. And I don't see any questions. Oh, Trustee Campbell, go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the presentation. I'd like to ask, would you see a functional or symbolic difference between suspending the program to a later date or deciding to end the program now?
Can I just get clarification on that? Do you mean like in terms of like a vote today, suspending it and reviewing it and then trying to re-implement it reformed and better? Or do you just mean suspending the decision in general?
Suspending the program until further decisions are taken in the fall with respect to a removed or importantly altered program versus deciding So imminently deciding to suspend versus imminently deciding to end with further actions either way in the fall.
Okay, yes, that's a clarification that makes sense to me now. I definitely think that just suspending the program really follows like a reformist framework. And we've seen like year after year that these reforms like really don't work. And that what happens while we try and like trial and error to see what reforms will do better is that people are literally harmed. There are students that do not feel like they can come to school, that do not feel valued at school, myself included, who had to be subject to the shaming and blaming of sexual assault victims by SRO officers. You know, what happens when we try and juggle things and see if we can set them up differently is that the people in the interim during those periods are still being harmed. So I am calling for a complete end to the program, starting as immediately as feasibly possible.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Trustee Fisher.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I guess the question I have for you, May, I want to thank you for your delegation. And I certainly haven't had a chance to fully read through the other report that you mentioned. We did receive it today. But I guess the question that I have for you is, you know, in the discussions, in the consultations that led to the report that you referenced, I wonder if you could speak to, you know, you've touched on the policing element, the SRO element, but is there anything that came out in those discussions that talked about the role of the school board in terms of, you know, our employees, our programs, our resources that perhaps, you know, did not support the students in the way that they needed to be supported? I was really intrigued in the report that's coming forward tonight, and some of the concerns that were raised about how the administration, how the institution didn't support these students properly. Is that something that you heard through your own consultations? I wonder if you could just speak to that a little bit.
Yes, for sure. It definitely came up. One thing that really was notable was how much these students, especially racialized, especially Black, especially Indigenous students, were fully aware of the discrimination within the school, whether it was from the SRO officers, from the administration, or from their own teachers. And this is something that I also experienced. You know, at my school, when we had locker searches, we knew that it was the bays with the Black boys that were going to be searched. We actually had many of my Black friends leave school to go to different schools where they thought that there would be less policing of them and where they would be held to be valued more so than in the school that I was going to, which I will name Sir Robert Borden High School, which I will note is actually named after a white supremacist. So I'm not very surprised by the fact that that systemic racism was pervasive enough to be impacting all the Black and Indigenous friends of mine at the school. And it leads to students literally not wanting to be on campus. That means they don't want to deal with the coaches that might be SROs, that might be other teachers that work with SROs in those sports teams, in the drama department, and in other places as well. So if you feel like you're not valued at school because you have an SRO that is a full-time staff member or is seen as a part of the team, which is something that was expressed in the OCDSB report, then they're going to feel criminalized. They're going to feel like their voices don't matter. And that's going to be reflected in the curriculum. That's going to be reflected in the way that the teachers label them as troublesome and as applied students and not as able to go into academic streams, and in their ability to want to spend time on campus.
No, I appreciate that, May. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
And thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Mason, for your delegation this evening. I would encourage you to watch the rest of the meeting on the live stream. Thank you. And we're moving on to our two delegations, starting with Haley Dash.
Hi, my name is Haley Dash. I'm a co-founder of Asilu Collective. We're a group of people who have been pushing for police and policing-free schools in Ottawa across the city since June 2020. And today our demands still remain. immediately terminate the SRO program, and end any and all relationships with Ottawa Police Services that are not provincially mandated. Today, I'm not only representing ASILU Collective, but also the over 125 students whose stories are featured in ASILU's recently released report, where we advise Ottawa School Board trustees like yourselves to terminate the SRO program, amongst other recommendations, as a result of our report findings. These findings are that there are serious mental and emotional detriments caused to students as a result of SROs. This is both long and short term, particularly to racialized students. We've also found that SROs uphold a culture of sexual violence in schools, which deeply impacts those who are gender oppressed. Our report findings are consistent with OCDSB's recently released report from the Office of the Human Rights and Equity Advisor, which also recommends the end of the SRO program. And this demonstrates how, despite different methodologies, data collection methods, and modes of analysis, the results are clear. Students want cops out of their schools immediately, and we do not need more reports, investigations, or data. Earlier this year, your Board of Trustees approved a motion to review police involvement in OCDSB schools. Trustee Ellis was quoted in a CBC article shortly after this passed, saying, quote, "It is my opinion that SROs can be an impediment for those at risk students to see school as a safe place. Their communities are over-policed, and then they go to school and your school is over-policed," end quote. And according to your October consultation plan, the estimated cost for the advertising, facilities, interpretation, translation, and materials alone for this review cost $15,000. So this review that you commissioned, which was done through a human rights and equity lens, is now finished. You got what you wanted, and it was very successful. The recommendations from it are clear and consistent with what ASILU has been demanding for the past year, which is to end the SRO program and reduce police involvement in schools to only what is provincially mandated. And if you do not vote in adherence with the review you all commissioned and the recommendations that have been put forward, you have failed as trustees.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dash. And is there any questions? Seeing none, I'd like to thank you for your delegation and encourage you to watch the remainder of the meeting on the live stream. Thank you. And I'm told that Lily Walsh will not be delegating this evening, so we're going to move on to Ramona Carrini. And I do not see her on my screen.
Hello.
Oh, there you are. Thank you very much. Go ahead. You have 2 minutes to present your delegation.
Hello, my name is Ramona, and I will be discussing my experience with the police as a racialized, gender-oppressed person and other harms caused by police in schools and elsewhere. I am an Iranian woman, and I have to deal with feeling like a threat and being treated differently by the police, not only in airports, but also when I'm walking with my family and doing daily tasks. I have dealt with numerous random security checks by CBSA, students and teachers racially profiling me, and I worry enough outside of school trying to hide my ethnic identity for my safety. So when I hear about an officer being on school grounds or on any school property, I feel unsafe. Police and policing everywhere is oppressive, which is why we rightfully seek calls to abolish SROs and police forces not only in Ottawa, but also Winnipeg, Hamilton, and more. Getting SROs removed from schools is only the tip of the iceberg in addressing systemic racism. Black and Indigenous youth already have to deal with harmful effects from the police in their daily lives. They can't feel safe in their homes, as shown by Anthony Ost's tragic death, or while walking on the streets, as shown by Chantel Moore's murder. Daniel Tenover was handcuffed at his school in Ottawa at just 9 years old, showing that even our schools aren't safe, and this is because of SROs. Racialized youth deserve to feel supported and trusted in their quests towards higher education. How can they have hope for their futures if their schools are treating them preemptively like they're already criminals? A testimony from ASILU Collective's report from a Black former OCSB student says, open quote, "They walked the halls and only spoke/approached groups of students of color," end quote. Policing in schools makes it clear that students don't deserve trust, respect, safety, or care. Police need to be gone completely from schools because their presence in any capacity encourages marginalized students down the school to prison pipeline. I demand all 4 Ottawa school boards to stop all funding for SROs with the intent of them never being in schools again.
Thank you very much, Ms. Carrini. Are there any questions for this delegation? And seeing none, thank you very much. I would encourage you to watch the rest of the meeting on the live stream. And moving on to our next delegation, Grace Hill. And do I see Grace Hill on our screen?
Grace is just joining now.
Okay. Shall we move on, Sandy, and come back to her?
Yeah, it looks like she's having difficulty joining.
Okay, thank you very much. So we will move on, and Grace Hill can delegate after she is fully signed on, and we're going to move to Andrea Vasquez Jimenez. Are you there?
Oh, yes.
Thank you very much. You have 2 minutes, and go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Andrea Vasquez Jimenez. I'm co-director of the Toronto, Canada-based Latinx Afro-Latin America Abya Education Network, LAN. Where under my portfolio, I'm also the lead for both the provincial Ontario and national Canada campaign for police-free schools. At LAN, we were a lead community organization that pushed for the successful and complete removal of the Police in Schools program in 2017 for a first of its kind community-led and collaborative process at the largest school board in Canada, the Toronto District School Board. On behalf of LAN and our partners, we give our full support for the community-led push for the full removal of the School Resource Officer program at the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board. We are in full solidarity with our Ottawa-based movement partners, Asilu Collective, who have been organizing locally around the issues of the school to prison and deportation pipeline, including police-free schools and policing-free schools. And we also uplift their report, which details the detrimental impacts of the program on students. The historical decision to remove police from Toronto District School Board has always been anchored by an equity lens and equity in practice. That means centering those who are most negatively impacted. Remember, the removal of the program is a necessary and first step, but not the only step. There is an urgent need to dismantle all policing infrastructures and create the conditions intentionally to support all students. What is needed is political will to ensure a transformative shift and move towards healthy, equitable, police-free schools. Having healthy, equitable police-free schools is a professional obligation and moves beyond that because it indeed is a legal obligation. It is a human right under the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. The continuation of any police in schools is gross negligence and ongoing human rights violation on your part. An equity-driven, anti-oppressive, anti-racist, equitable, liberatory, and life-affirming educational space, wherever it may be, is not possible with police presence, policing, and criminalization happening.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Oh, Trustee Bell, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for your presentation and the work that you do. I'm wondering if you could repeat again what are the human rights accords that speak to police in schools being a violation of human rights?
Yeah, so Canada is a signatory to the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. So it does infringe on that human right, but as well as in regards to having access to quality of education for all students, which is very much undermined by police presence in educational spaces.
Thank you very much. And Trustee Fisher, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the delegation, Andrea. I guess the question I have for you, you spoke to the importance of taking the first step of suspending, removing the SRO program, but you also talked about the importance of dismantling other policing infrastructure within school boards and schools. I wonder if you could speak to a little bit more about, how you define that policing infrastructure. What does that look like for you? Can you explain what that means to you?
Yeah, definitely. And I can definitely, just amplify particular examples and then speak more to it as in general. So definitely want to contextualize this in regards to the SRO program that was removed at the Toronto District School Board. It was paid by the Toronto Police Services in that context. And so with the removal, it's important to understand that there wasn't any additional or new injection of funding. And within that context, also, decades of underfunding and under-resourcing by provincial governments. With that said, I'm really looking at moving away from punitive disciplinary practices and rather towards systems of care systems of nurturing. So with an equity lens, what they had done collectively was a mapping where resources and funding was actually allocated at that particular time. And there was a remapping of reallocation of resources to ensure that students who were most negatively impacted were being supported. And so some of those examples that looks like is actually hiring community members into positions where they're able to provide supports and make those connections of bringing community into the classroom and vice versa. There was also closing of loopholes, right? So when we're talking about punitive disciplinary practices and the way policing happens in educational spaces, we can also look at, suspensions and expulsions, right? And so by closing up loopholes in regards to addressing inequities in suspension and expulsion processes, there's accountability measures that were placed, particularly around the discretionary measures to suspend and expel students, and have accountability measures on educators who would usually, as one of the ways that they would deal with particular things that were discretionary, instead of just automatically looking to suspend students, really bringing in restorative and transformative practices, connecting with community members, connecting with family members. So really, once again, moving away from punitive practices. In addition to that, there were changes to structures, processes to ensure year-long school board-wide deeper unlearning and relearning. So once again, the removal of a police in school program is just literally the first step. Offering now anti-Black racism courses, the creation of a Center of Excellence for Black Student Achievement with full-time staff positions. And so those are some concrete examples. And we can even see in the Caring and Safe Schools annual report where we see 53% plummeting of expulsions and 24% of suspensions in comparison to the year where there was the SRO program. But what we mean by when we're talking about policing free schools is the clear reality that, the way that policing works and surveillance works is not only due to police presence within their schools, right? There are, unfortunately, whether it be, even unintentionally, there are educators who also police movements of students, who police the way, their hair is, what they're wearing, and also instances of, automatically wanting to contact police. And so these are ways, just some of the ways that policing structures continue to be present, even with the removal of an SRO program or a police in schools program. And that's why there is more work that is necessary beyond just the removal of the program.
That's super helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you. And moving on to Trustee Scott.
Thank you. And given the broad range of work that's been undertaken by your association, I wondered if you had any comment on curriculum reform.
Oh, yeah, 100%. We would definitely would hope that provincially our governments, would have taken leadership beyond. Even myself, when I was in, whether it be in high school years ago, it's pretty much the same curriculum for decades, right? And the reality that our curriculum currently doesn't actually allocate space to bring up really looking at systemic issues around equity, around anti-racism, around anti-oppression, really acknowledging that we are on stolen Indigenous land and the real histories of colonization, genocide, and enslavement through the creation of, what we currently know today is Canada. There's also no highlighting around, that lack of critical issues, right? So there definitely has to be a change of curriculum, but also around hiring practices. And there can be leadership at school boards in regards to creating courses, but as well as in regards to their hiring practices. Our educators and all staff that are present in educational spaces, are they actually reflective of the students who they are serving? But in addition to being reflective of their students, do they actually have, a record standing of anti-racist, anti-oppression, healing-centered engagement praxis, right? because it's not just about them being representative of students they're serving, but it's about how they work within educational spaces.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would encourage you to watch the rest of the meeting on the live stream. Thank you very much. Moving on to our the next delegation, Magda Osmond. Are you there? Thank you very much. Go ahead. You have 2 minutes. We can't hear you, Magda. I'm sorry. As I don't know if you're muted or not, but
sorry, I got it.
Okay, thank you.
I had to call in through my phone and I was muted on my phone. So I just really want to talk about how the SRO program really follows the suspension pattern in our school that also match the criminalization data in the city. So essentially, we are encouraging school-to-prison pipelines and a form of systemic racism. And we know when we look at the suspension rates that we know that First Nation, Métis, Black, Middle Eastern, Indigenous, boy, and gender diverse or people with disabilities are disproportionately suspended. And that again matches the pattern of criminalization. So a lot of the proponents that justify police presence say that this is a form of early intervention or interaction, which then help community police relations. But all they do is mark children early on and criminalize them early on. So we are not disrupting or lessening the oppression. We are criminalizing kids within the school system in the same way the police do. So their presence in school actually just compounds the oppression these groups of kids and their families face. That is everything. And I would like to also say by voting to keep SROs in school, you are voting for systemic racism against Black and Indigenous youth. Your vote is either for anti-Black racism or against anti-Black racism. It is either for anti-Indigenous racism or against it. It's that simple. It's black and white.
Thank you very much. And are there any questions? Seeing no questions, I'd like to thank you very much, and I encourage you to watch the rest of the meeting on the live stream. And I'm told that Grace Hill is now with us, so if she could join us.
Hi.
Hello. Go ahead. You have 2 minutes for your delegation.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. My name is Grace Hill, and I am a grade 9 student in the OCDSB. My pronouns are she, her. I would like to advocate for the abolishment of SRO programs.
Grace, I'm sorry, you must have accidentally or somehow had a glitch there. We can't hear you. Maybe you hit the mute button.
And criminalize, racialize, and LGBTQ+ youth, but also the original intention of why they are in our schools is so often lost, and raises the question of what purpose do they truly serve in our school systems, and how can we envision a better program for keeping our schools safe. I was looking on the Ottawa Policing website and found the official roles of an SRO officer. What include as follows: 1, provide support to your school community. 2, answering calls during incidents in schools. 3, laws and safety related lectures. And 4, providing guidance on school issues, bullying, criminal activity, etc. These are not clear roles, nor their helpful descriptors on what SROs officially truly are, therefore difficult to hold them accountable to anything. This is dangerous, and no wonder there is so much bias within policing. Additionally, SROs are not trained to work with children, nor are they trained to teach or provide guidance and emotional support to students in times of need, which these roles misleadingly entail. This brings me back to my main point. The job description of SROs are unclear, and neither is the job in action, concluding that SROs are not just unhelpful for racialized students, but the whole student body. I call upon you all to change the trajectory of our future, not only of circumstances relating to the OCDSB, but of all Canadian youth who will be looking to you to grow up in a more inclusive, safe, and compassionate world where students can finally go to school and thrive without feeling like a criminal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And are there any questions for Ms. Hill? Trustee Schwartz, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Grace, thanks very much for joining this evening. I think it takes a lot of courage for the young people we have joining us this evening to speak, and of course anybody who has dealt with years of oppression to speak out on these issues. My question for you is, you mentioned other ways of keeping schools safe, and can you maybe share with us what you think might be helpful in sort of turning our attention to other ways of keeping schools safe?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. So similar to what I mentioned during my little presentation is restorative justice programs has been shown to be extremely beneficial within the implementation of these programs in our school. Also, refunding into mental health resources, counselors, and supports for our racialized students in our schools. These are ways in which we can especially de-escalate bullying and all of these certain systems at play that makes it difficult for students to feel safe in schools. So with those implementations, I believe that we'll overall have a safer school environment for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace.
Thank you very much. And seeing no further questions, thank you very much. And I'd like to encourage you to watch the live stream. And moving on to Lindsay Dorder.
Okay, hello all, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, you have 2 minutes.
All right, I am joining as a community member in Ottawa and as a member of the SILU Collective, while also supporting La N for the national wide campaign on abolishing in-school police programs. Today, I support ending the SRO program in all forms and also ending all relations with the Ottawa Police Services. I first want to say that I went to primary and secondary school in Southern Ontario in a largely white neighborhood, and never did our school have police presence. White neighborhoods never have to consider this, which is evident from the lived experiences as SILU reports in their recent publication on the SRO program from 125 current and former Ottawa students. It is clear that Ottawa students do not want police in their schools. The youth recommend that the funds from this program instead be reallocated to supporting and nurturing their growth. Students undergoing racialization are already heavily policed and oppressed outside of school, and so it becomes additionally dangerous on their mental and physical health to be policed while in school. Police should not be the last resort, as this upholds the school to prison pipeline through systemic racism, ableism, gender oppression, and more. Addressing root causes through intersectionality and abolition and stopping the criminalization of your students should be the priority. Also, the OCDSB must hold true to your human rights and equity lens on your commission report, because if not, you are lying and you are failing your students who clearly want this program to be terminated in all forms. It is in your hands now to actively listen to your students. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And are there any questions? And seeing no questions, thank you very much for your delegation. Moving on to our next delegation, and I'm not probably going to pronounce this correctly, but I'll try it. Faiz Jan, go ahead. You have 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Faiz Jan. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, which I'd like to use to speak up about the SRO program. The easiest way to dive into it is to look at the two main justifications for the program. The first of these justifications is that the SROs bring police officers and students together and create trust. This argument is by far the easiest to prove flawed, since police officers are used in schools not to support students, but as threats against students for misbehaving. Threats do not bring you closer to an individual, they push you further away. And the SROs are used in schools to establish fear, especially, unfortunately, targeting Black, Indigenous, and LGBTQ plus students the most. If there's a real desire for the police to get closer to students, the way forward is not to enforce a punitive system through threats, like a real-life episode of Scared Straight. It is to be better. The police department will need to take major steps, not by pushing some sort of marketing campaign, which this is what it is, but by implementing policy, by enforcing testing of officers for biases, by teaching officers how to properly treat students, by showing the community that they are willing and able to help out in the community beyond simple persecution and arrest of criminals, which right now it is evident, even in the SRO program, is not happening. The second of these justifications is that the SROs keep schools safe, and this isn't true at all either. SRO's use of threats of retaliation makes students feel unsafe. It damages their ability to pursue proper academic goals. And even when threats or actions are being used against offending students, it does nothing to dissuade them from reoffending. The understanding of the failures of retributive justice is ages old. During the 5th century BC, Sun Tzu published The Art of War. In the book, the chapter entitled The Use of Intelligence details that to convert a spy, a general should not torture them, not try to punish them or threaten them, but show them the benefits of your side, to make them feel welcome, to present them a better world. This is restorative justice that you heard so much about today, showing people how to be better. And we do this by funding mental health care for students, by giving students the tools they need to access well-paying jobs, and having enough educational support to improve academically. You want to keep schools safe? Fund those programs. Don't sign on to a program that's used to bully students, because that never works. It's clear, as you will see, that this program aims to do good, but it accomplishes none of it. Instead, it harms the community by putting marginalized citizens as the targets of constant threats, which undoubtedly will affect their ability to learn. Please leave the SRO program.
Thank you very much. And are there any questions? And seeing none, Trustee Scott, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks very much for your presentation, which was focused very largely on the school resource officer program. Outside of that program, are there ever any circumstances at all in which you would see a value to police being involved with schools?
I think there's some amount of value. If you send like a police officer to the school, unarmed, not in uniform, just to talk about some of the issues that matter, to talk about, for example, mental health care and like what support systems there are for that, or try to make a genuine effort towards working with students and teaching children what tools are available to them if they want to stay safe, right? Bringing armed guards in doesn't help. It doesn't make anyone feel secure. It scares people, right? You wouldn't have military personnel in your schools, right? So it's the same sort of thing. You would have maybe a veteran come into the school and talk about their experiences and talk about like remembering World War II, right? It's the same idea. Those are the kinds of programs that I think we should see.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your delegation. I would encourage you to watch the rest of the meeting on the live stream. And moving on to our next delegation, Amateur Rahim Salim Alara. Are you there?
Yes. Before I speak, I would just let you know that Moshe will be speaking on behalf of Lily, so you might want to let her in so that she can do that. And please restart my time.
Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Amateur Rahim, and I'm a student of the OCDSB. I shall start by saying that school resource officers are not needed in school at all. We are repeatedly told that SROs are for the safety of students, but this couldn't be further from the truth. The two most racialized schools in Ottawa, Gloucester and Ridgemont, have full-time officers present in school fully armed. This is proof of how cops are here to criminalize, control, discipline, and punish people of color, even youth like me. Other schools in Ottawa do not receive the same treatment, and when SROs are at schools, it is also the racialized students who are targeted. The outcome of this is that students of color are treated like criminals within their own learning environment, which hinders their academic success, amongst other things. As a Black Muslim student who attends a mostly white school, I feel safer knowing that there aren't any police officers in my school on a day-to-day basis. But it saddens and enrages me that other Black students are more exposed to police and their violence than I am. As mentioned in this report, students are well aware of how officers treat their BIPOC peers, and being asked a simple question like, "Where are you going?" by an SRO is a nerve-wracking experience for me as a Black student because of the knowledge of how my peers are being treated. There's absolutely no reason for police officers to be in a learning environment. Schools are safe places, are places where students should feel safe, and I stand with my peers and the ASILU Collective to demand that the OCDSB, as well as all other school boards in Ottawa, end their SRO programs immediately.
Thank you very much. And are there any questions? And seeing none, thank you very much for your delegation. I would encourage you to follow the rest of the meeting on the live stream. Thank you. Moving on to our next delegation, Linda Berry.
Hello, and thank you for listening to me to speak today. So my name is Linda. I'm a student with the OCDSB, and I believe that cops should be out of our schools immediately so that we can finally prioritize student-centered support like restorative justice programs. Restorative justice programs are the most viable option in schools, as research shows they do not cause harm like SROs do, and many Canadian people want to implement these programs. They are community-centered and put student care first. An example of this is from Almaguin Highland Secondary School in South River, Ontario, and it has implemented a very successful restorative justice program over the past 2 years. The restorative justice program uses techniques such as meditation, healing circles, and group conferences to allow students the opportunity to reflect on the incident and learn from their mistakes to resolve it peacefully. The vice principal of the school shares, "Instead of being punitive, we bring offenders back to the community with an agreement to move forward." Ever since the restorative justice program began at Almaguin High School, there has been a 0% recidivism rate. Furthermore, research shows people in Canada support and want restorative justice in Canada. The Department of Justice from the Government of Canada found when surveying people in Canada that 62% believe that restorative justice programs would provide victims of crime with a more satisfying and meaningful experience than the mainstream criminal justice system. We cannot continue to criminalize students, especially students of color that are being targeted, as we saw through the Toronto District School Board. We must provide resources and support for students to learn and do better. I demand that we remove SROs from the OCDSB School Board and recommend using restorative justice programs instead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And are there any questions? Trustee Boothby, go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for your delegation. I'm just interested. So I like the concept of the restorative justice, but I'm just wondering if you have some thoughts on how we make sure that the restorative justice doesn't have some similar biases built into it, or that would bubble up.
Well, the policing system is very particular with its biases because it began with biases. It began with really policing Indigenous people, policing Black people, and we see that those biases are in policing in Canada in general. Whereas restorative justice, like, I don't think there would be the possibility of bias because it would really be about talking about it. It would be about students coming together. It wouldn't be oppressing or policing students, which is the only place where I think that there really can be bias, because there's stereotypes, there's assumptions. I don't think that there would be assumptions and stereotypes if students are just talking to each other. If we have these programs where students are really able to just communicate, we're not policing them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And any further questions? Seeing none, I'd like to thank you for your delegation. I encourage you to watch the rest of the meeting on the live stream. And moving on to Moksha Singh Sharp.
Hello.
Hello. You have 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Moksha. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a high school OCDSB student. So, disciplinary measures and punishment have been proven again and again not to be effective. And this is how SROs are trained to problem solve. They are not only unhelpful, but also make situations worse. These are proven ineffective not only by simple logic, but also by multiple studies and reports that are only a Google search away. So we are seeing student behavior being criminalized by SROs, instead of having the root cause of their problems addressed through access to resources. Us students and community members are upset that our school boards, just like our entire country, preach about how diverse and accepting we are despite our actions exposing the opposite truth. For these reasons, among many others, I am standing with my peers and the community of so-called Ottawa to demand police-free schools across all school boards, abolish SROs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And are there any questions? Seeing none, let's move on to our last delegation, and that is Marian Noor.
Actually, my friend Lily was not able to make it today, and I was wondering if I could speak for her.
Do you have her written text?
Yes, I have it open right now.
Okay, let's go on to Marian, and then afterwards.
No,
you
she's
can
more
speak.
than welcome to go before me. More than welcome to.
Okay, if you want to speak on behalf of Lily, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Today, I will be discussing SROs influencing rape culture, sexism, and silencing victims of sexual assault in schools. SROs have been notorious for telling victims that it's their own fault and their problem if their private images get leaked. In a testimony from an OCDSB student that was mentioned in a SILU Collective's report, they shared that the SROs came to their school and did an assembly on revenge porn. The following is a direct quote from the SILU report, open quote. They did assemblies about revenge porn, yet they focused on shaming and scaring the girls. They said that we could be charged for creating and distributing child pornography. Therefore, if it was shared around the school, it was our fault for not being smart. It was our fault for taking the nudes in the first place. My friends and I felt annoyed and confused and ashamed. We didn't know if we could take pictures in bikinis. We didn't tell anyone when our pictures were shared without our consent. When my boyfriend shared mine without my consent, I was terrified I was going to be arrested, so I told no adults and just suffered alone. The testimony shows SRO's blatant disregard for students and their mental health, particularly girls and other gender-oppressed youth who experience sexual violence. This has a significant impact on the students due to the suffering in silence and more specifically isolating themselves, falling into a depressive state, and in some severe cases, like Amanda Todd and Rete Parsons, committing suicide. Keep in mind that these mental health issues often leave students with absent marks and feeling like they aren't safe at school. We cannot allow this to continue and must do better for students like myself. Abolish the SRO program immediately. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And since Lily's not here, it's hard for her to answer questions.
Yeah, because she did all the research on this. So
thank you very much. And I encourage you to watch the live stream. So moving on to Marian, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Marian. I was born and raised in Ottawa, which is the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. My siblings and I have collectively attended schools within this district for a combined total of 43 years. Firstly, I'd like to take a moment to honor the lives taken on Sunday in London at the hands of a blatant terrorist attack to the First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people who are actively fighting for their Libération against the settler colonial state of Canada, and who have been grieving the horrendous findings at the Kamloops Indian residential schooling. And lastly, to the people of Palestine who are resisting everyday and ongoing ethnic cleansing and genocide in their own home. From Turtle Island to Palestine, no one is free until we are all free. I currently work in sexual and reproductive health rights, specifically around the need for comprehensive sex ed in schools and access to reproductive health services, which is infringed upon due to policing. SROs are a form of policing that directly harm racialized students. This city only a few short months ago voted to increase its policing budget, while we have seen a worldwide call to action to defund police and reallocate funding into social services. We have seen data that shows Black and Indigenous students are more likely to be suspended, expelled, and to receive overall harsher punishments. While students are being over-policed, the root causes of inequity are ignored: housing, healthcare, food access, and countless others. SROs on school grounds decrease the overall learning experiences of students. Our youth are criminalized from birth. They are taught to move slowly, record and document interaction with all forms of policing at the fear of losing their lives at any time. SROs do not keep schools safe. They do not protect students, and they do not enrich their learning experiences. SRO programs are a form of surveillance and are participants in the school to prison pipeline. Countless reports have shown that they have no long-lasting benefit, including the recently released report by the Asilu Collective. Seeing SROs in schools is traumatizing as BIPOC youth witness the violence their communities face at the hands of policing every day, along with the long-lasting mental health impacts that this can have. Students do not need to be infantilized. They deserve to be in a space where they are not criminalized. I, along with the countless others, ask this publicly elected board to do the right thing, shut down this program, reallocate funding, and cut ties with the Ottawa Police Services. Policing cannot be fixed or done right when it is doing the exact job that it was designed to do, and that is to kill and harm Black and Indigenous people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And are there any questions? And Trustee Bill, go ahead.
Marian, thank you very much for your presentation. You covered a lot of ground in 2 minutes. I'm wondering, you mentioned your family and 43 years. Is there anything in particular of those 43 years that you would like to bring to our attention?
I think that firstly, thank you so much for your comments. I think it's a little troubling, or it's just to be cognizant of asking Black and Indigenous people about their experiences of harm or racism that they may have experienced at the hands of, an oppressive system. I would say that I have witnessed it at the hands of, I have 4 brothers. I am a middle child. I'm 27. I have a 30-year-old brother, 29-year-old brother, and twin 23-year-old brothers. I have seen it in the ways in which my brother's hair has been commented on in schools. I've seen it in the ways in which they have been targeted by teachers. I have seen it in the ways that comments have been made about our names, the way teachers have, or SRO officers have actively said, you don't want to go running to Shaniqua, or inappropriate comments like that. I've seen it in the ways in which they are more suspended. My brothers have experienced more detentions. The fact that when you come home and in our everyday life, we experience violence in the outside world, and in a place in which we're supposed to be enriched and we're supposed to be protected and cared for, we are continuously exposed to violence 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And due to the fact that the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board continuously does not improve itself, do better, whether it be in its curriculum, its hiring, the lack of representation of teachers and gender diverse folks, it's not shocking that you see the fact that because we are not addressing the socioeconomic and the overarching institutions that are harming folks, it just shows that, no offense, no one cares. Like, people do not care what Black folks are experiencing, what Indigenous folks are experiencing, because these are not, all of these systems of oppression are not separate entities. These are intersectional. Policing was created to arrest and hunt down escaped slaves, and the way that to harm Indigenous folks. And then we see it in our policing systems. And it's the fact that you see young children, Black young children, being policed. We saw what happened in Edmonton, Alberta, when a young boy who wore a do-rag, which is a protective hairstyle for Black youth, was told that this is gang symbols. It is the fact that we are continuously told and told again, you are not okay, you are not welcome here, and you are not cared for. And that's the reality. And if the SRO system continues, then you are directly saying that you are okay with Black and Indigenous folks being killed, murdered, and not welcome here, and at the hands of this settler colonial state. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Point of order. I think Marian has raised a very important issue, which is given the content that has been
It's
shared with us.
It's only
Yeah,
questions,
but
Trustee Bell,
I'm
unfortunately, at
just,
this point.
this is a point of order, given that there, I just asked potentially traumatic questions. Is there any support in this meeting should people be triggered, or is there any recommendation on behalf of the board of where people should go given this traumatic testimony?
As someone who works in equity, I can give a recommendation. NASEHA, NASEHA, is a online, and they do round the clock mental health support for folks. They are online, and you can do text-based supports as well, calling supports, and they're offering extended hours due to the London terrorist attack. So yes, if that answers.
Okay, thank you very much. And Trustee Blackburn, do you have a question?
I do, Mr. Chair. Thank you, and through you. So I just have a question of clarification. So is it your position that the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board has done nothing to fight anti-oppression?
I think that it's difficult to fight oppression when you are a system of oppression. So I think that that's a clarifying thing just to note. It's the reality that I don't think that the school board has done enough. I do not think so, because when we're talking about a measure, it's the fact that if you were looking at within a time-based context and you were looking at it within time, I don't think enough work has been done over time. I don't think this curriculum has been improved. I don't think that many things have been improved. I think that the fact that the history curriculum continues to ignore the experiences of Indigenous folks and the experience of Black folks in Canada and the long-standing oppression that people have experienced. I think it's the fact that your curriculum still has not improved sexual and reproductive health rights and been inclusive of folks' diverse lived experiences. I think that just a blanket solidarity statement is not enough. I think that this is the bare minimum. And I think the fact that people are actively saying, is the bare minimum enough, is shameful enough. So will I say that the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board has done enough? Absolutely not. And I will say that it is bare minimum what they have done, if it is at that.
Thank you very much. And seeing no further questions, I'd like to thank you for your delegation and encourage you to watch the live stream. And I do have a comment from Trustee Bell, and that is that if there's anyone who feels that they have been traumatized by this discussion, if we would have a recommendation, Madam Director, where they could possibly go, if at all possible. Is there anything that we can offer people, Madam Director?
Thank you through the chair, and thank you for the question, Trustee Bell. Superintendent Simmons has joined us with his camera on as he is a conduit to a lot of our mental health support. So can I ask Superintendent Simmons please comment on that inquiry?
Thank you, and Chair, through you. I think it's a delicate situation, and people should have avenues to access supports. Certainly our school social workers and mental health professionals are available during the school day to reach out through if students should feel the need for additional support as a result of conversations this evening, or indeed anytime. There are also some other services around Kids Help Phone, Mental Health Crisis Line, and the Distress Center of Ottawa, where people can turn to for additional support. Certainly reaching out through the school would help us be able to identify other areas where we might be able to offer some additional support. But if I may, the Mental Health Crisis Line, their phone number is 613-722-6914, and the Distress Center of Ottawa, 613-238-3311, and I can put those in the chat for people to be able to see in a few minutes.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you very much for that. And I'd like to advise that's come to the end of our delegations for this evening. However, there are some written delegations that are included in the agenda package, and I would encourage trustees to also read those. But we have to move on our agenda, and now moving to item number 5, briefing from the chair. I'd like to call upon the chair to provide a briefing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yesterday, we were shocked and saddened by the news of the horrendous attack on a Muslim family just out for a Sunday evening family stroll in London. As we reflect on this loss, we must be unequivocal in our condemnation of Islamophobia and hate. On behalf of the OCDSB, I would like to extend our deepest sympathies to all those who are affected. We stand in solidarity and care with the Muslim community. Hatred, discrimination, and racism of all kinds have no place in our society. Everyone deserves the right to live their lives without fear of violence. In recent days and weeks, there have been too many disturbing reports in the news, including the finding of the 215 Indigenous children buried at the Kamloops residential school. Stories about the renewed conflicts in the Middle East, the anniversary of the death of George Floyd, just to name a few. Hearing about these events may
And I'm afraid we might have lost Trustee Scott due to the peculiarities of the internet in her area. So I don't know when she is. We'll just wait for a minute in case her internet comes back on. And maybe what we'll do is we'll see she's signed off and coming back on. But maybe what we'll do is have her start again when she returns. But for now, we'll just go to briefing from the director. Madam Director.
Thank you, through you, Chair. If you like, I can finish the comments of the Chair as I do have them in my notes as well, or I can wait to have her return as per your direction. What would you like me to do?
Maybe just carry on with your briefing, Madam Director.
Okay, I will do that. Thank you. I'm just getting a signal here. There was a power failure. Oh, the Chair has returned. Would you like her to complete her statement then?
Yes, go ahead, Trustee. Go ahead, Chair Scott, to complete your briefing.
I'm very sorry about that. I will leave my video off, hoping my Wi-Fi holds again. But I was simply saying, for all of us, it is our responsibility, individually and collectively, to help eliminate hatred, discrimination, and race.
Do you have the rest of her text, Madam Director?
Sorry, I think she may have departed from the text a little bit, but I'll complete it. Being confronted by these stories may be challenging for children, particularly those whose lived experiences reflect similar traumatizing events. Last week's parent update from the OCDSB contains resources to help families find supportive ways to talk about events like these with their children. So those were the notes from the ending of the Chair's update. And with your indulgence, Chair Penny, I will continue on with the Director's update.
Go ahead.
I do have the honor to announce that 2 OCDSB students have been awarded the Schulich Leader Scholarships. A.Y. Jackson Secondary School student Sabrina Button has been selected to receive a $100,000 Schulich Leader Scholarship to study at Queen's University this fall. Lisgar Institute student Albert Nitu has been selected to receive an $80,000 Schulich Leader Scholarship to study at McGill University this fall. These prestigious entrance college scholarships are awarded to high school graduates enrolling in a science, technology, engineering, or mathematics undergraduate program. I'd like to congratulate Sabrina and Albert on their accomplishment and wish them the very best in their future pursuits. With your indulgence, Chair Penny, I can move on and continue into the COVID update.
Go ahead.
Yes. For the COVID-19 update today, provincial reopening plans, step 1 will begin on June 11th. That's Friday. 72% of adults in Ontario have received at least 1 dose of a COVID-19 vaccine. As a result, the province has announced that Ontario will move to step 1 of its roadmap to reopen at 12:01 on Friday, June 11th. In terms of vaccines, appointments are now available in Ottawa for individuals 12 and older to book their COVID-19 vaccine using the Ontario website, covid19ontario.ca, book vaccine. Ontario is now accelerating second doses for all Ontarians. Detailed information for vaccine access, safety, and other information is available on the Ottawa Public Health vaccine webpage. In terms of testing, we do continue to work with OPH and CHEO with regard to COVID-19 testing strategies. This has included a pilot of a take-home testing kit and the distribution of communication to support testing clinics. These activities are important strategies to manage the spread of COVID-19 at this time and to develop practices which will support sustainable school openings in September. And in terms of end of year events, last week, the province announced that notwithstanding that schools would not reopen for in-person learning this year, schools could host graduation events in person for students in all grades. The OCDSB has been actively planning virtual commencement recognition events for graduates and virtual leaving ceremonies for elementary students at key transition points. Planning for virtual events will continue, with consideration being given to in-person opportunities for students, particularly those in grade 12 and 8, to safely attend school to pick up graduation materials, drop off supplies, and take home or take commemorative photographs. Schools will communicate details to families directly. In terms of planning for September, our work continues on planning for September. Recent ministry discussions have highlighted the need to plan for several possible secondary school delivery models. At the moment, we are hopeful that we will be able to proceed with a 2-course model with daily in-person instruction, moving towards a 4-course semestered model as soon as we can. While planning is actively underway, it is anticipated that the ministry will provide further guidance in the summer. We will continue to provide updates as information becomes available. And finally, survey launch. Through the pandemic, the district has undertaken several consultations with parents, students, and staff. The third and final survey will be launched this week and will be open until June the 18th. This feedback has been very useful in our planning so far, and we continue to encourage people to participate in this upcoming survey item. And at this point, Chair, that's all for the COVID update. And so if there are questions, I am, of course, happy to answer or have my staff respond.
Thank you very much. And we have a question from Trustee Boothby. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, with respect to summer school that parents, pardon me, have already signed up to, and particularly this summer school for the children that were hoping to attend in person because they were below provincial standards, and so a little bit of additional help for them. So I understand that we have now moved from an in-person model to a complete online model. So first of all, is that correct? And secondly, why have we been required to go to that model, given that summer camps are being allowed to be opened and our classrooms, I can't imagine, would be much larger?
Thank you through you, Chair. I will start the response to that question, and perhaps AD Reynolds will be able to jump in. We basically, when you're planning for summer instruction, as you well know, this kind of planning starts way back in April, April and March. And so one of the things we did was recognizing that, you know, we have a lot of questions that are still remaining unanswered. We had to essentially make a decision about what it is we were going to do. And so at this point, the decision has been that we will maintain, for the most part, a virtual piece. We do recognize that we do have one program that is running out of special education that only can run in person. And we're making every effort to ensure that that program does indeed run, albeit we do recognize that we may have some challenges. We are still pursuing that piece for an in-person piece to ensure that we can serve those students. I see that Superintendent Smith has turned on her camera, and as she has oversight for continuing ed and summer school, I will ask her to speak on that. But I do want to also indicate that we have multiple summer school programs that are running through a variety of departments. And so that's another piece for consideration. Superintendent Smith, do you want to share with us your perspective?
Thank you, Director, and I appreciate your comments. I was just going to add that we need to be mindful that summer camps run in a largely outdoor configuration, which is quite different from our summer school experiences. While we would love to have been in a position to offer in-school learning for learners over the summer, we also recognize that with the current situation still being somewhat unstable, it would not be prudent of us to be promising that experience to students and then withdrawing it at the last minute. So we did make the decision when the provincial announcement around maintaining the school closures was made that we would move our elementary literacy and numeracy summer school programs to a virtual platform.
Okay, thank you. So summer school is, with respect to the memo from the province, is considered this school year?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Boothby. Are there any further questions for the director? Trustee Bell, go ahead.
Thank you. And through Chair, I was wondering along the same lines if we will be able to open up our schools to community summer camp programs, and what is the status on that? Thanks.
Okay, and I will call on CFO Carson, who is here with us, but I will remind trustees that we've had much conversation about the fact that we also have multiple facilities projects to ensure the safe reopening as we get into the fall. And we do have some timeline obligations around that piece. So it is a juggling exercise, to say the least. But I will turn to CFO Carson, who might be able to shed some light on the community use of schools piece.
Thanks, Chair, and I apologize for the sound quality. Community use has been reaching out to our normal users in the past couple of weeks to see what their plans might be. And especially once the new guidelines were received, we are in the process of looking at what sites will be available. And as we hear from the groups, their own plans, we are prepared to work with them to facilitate access to the spaces wherever we can. It has been complicated by some of the delays and some of the clarifications people are looking for in the activities. but we are committed as always to support those groups wherever we can.
All right. Thank you very much for that answer. Moving on to Trustee Huff, go ahead.
Hi, just a question follow-up related to convocations and graduations. Of course, we're all getting a million messages from families who want to see something in person. It sounds like the virtual option is the direction we're going in. Is there any possibility for school-led, family-based organization of an outdoor event on our school properties in conjunction with what we have been proposing, the virtual or the pickup procedure that we had last year? My own daughter went through that last year, where she wandered through the arch at Woodruff and picked up her stuff and was able to walk around and get a photo taken with a billboard. Could the parent councils do something on our school properties outdoors beyond what we're doing? Just a question following up on some questions from parents.
I will ask AD Reynolds to respond, as he's been leading the work on developing our graduation opportunities.
Thanks, and through you, Chair. We're working with our secondary schools to see if some in-person opportunity might exist beyond just simply showing up to collect, maybe by a small group or individual, an opportunity perhaps for a guest to attend and for a photograph to be taken, and maybe some limited interaction with peers. But, despite the comments from the government, we do need to remember that, these types of things require an awful lot of staff support, as you're well aware if you've witnessed a commencement, and our staff are all teaching full-time, generally at home, right up until the 22nd, and then at which point we're calculating final marks and doing promotion meetings, getting people set up for summer school who need that, and of course finishing the actual full virtual commencement. So any more substantive activities really do run the risk of, not having staff to support it in the buildings because it's on a voluntary basis, and as well causing a lot of disruption to the learning that's ongoing. So there's a lot of restraints around trying to pull something like that together. I heard what you're saying about independent groups, school council or whatnot, running their own event for kids. Anything school council plans has to be in line with our own policies and procedures. And I think that would extend to our own COVID protocols and supervision requirements, unless it was done through community use of schools on a weekend or evening. And I'm not sure what the liability insurance of school councils extends to. So I would be reluctant to, recommend that without having a chance to speak with the CFO and others and see what risks might be in place there. But the same kind of restraints around numbers and masking and sign in and contact tracing and all those things that we're managing in the day school would be in place for school councils as well. But to that end, there will be some kind of in-person piece in addition to the full virtual. We're just trying to hash out what those details might be, but schools we hope will be in a position to communicate something perhaps very early next week.
If I could just ask a follow-up question. One of the other big concerns that's been brought forward to me by several parents is photos. And, unlike this particular year, our previous year, my daughter's year, they were able to have, half a school year's full of photos and whatnot to use for their virtual graduation. They had all had their photographs taken by the school photographer for yearbooks and whatnot. So there was fodder, there was material to use for the virtual event. Is there any way that we can offer an outdoor opportunity in a tent, dressed up kids come, get their mortar stuck in their head and get a photo taken? Can we do a walk-through booth at schools to get photos done for those kids who haven't had grad photos? Just that's probably the thing that the parents are being most vociferous about, is just the lack of that memorabilia that they will have from this final year. And that's the difference between the group of kids who graduated last year and the group this year. And it seems to me like we could have planned in some way to do this. I know that we can't probably do gowns and hoods because that would be a cross-contamination possibility. But if all of the kids are being given their mortar, one could envision the possibility of an outdoor tent with a stool that could be wiped between students, and photos could be taken with the kids as they pick up their mortars. I'll just put that out there as an idea and hope that somebody can pick up on it, because it certainly would be important to a lot of families.
So I can, address that a little bit. Certainly, communications has been working with schools to provide to support the technology for the collection of selfies and other photographs from students now, which is ongoing as part of preparing for those virtual commencements. As well, certainly we're encouraging principals with that in-person opportunity, the details of which are coming, to take some photographs at that opportunity to add to that. You're certainly right, though, it won't have the robustness that we would normally have without having had the at least half a year of extracurriculars and events and things of that nature. But to that end, we're working very closely with our professional photographers. Largely, they still have not resumed work, even though they were in this transition between end of stay at home and start of phase one, which is coming soon. But they have not ramped up yet to returning to work, although we're working with them and we're trying to encourage them to do so, because we are going to have to find some way to get students their grad photos, but probably not in time for the final commencement. So to the end, can each student, arrive and have schools don't have photographers on hand. They'll try to take some photos with the technology they have, but I wouldn't want to raise the expectation that you might get something like a grad photo done by the teacher that's available to come out and help support that day. You know what I mean? So, but we're trying to come up with some ways to accumulate some material for the virtual ceremony. I saw Executive Officer Giroux turn on her camera. I don't know if that was an indication that she wanted to contribute or.
Just to add a couple of things. One, we have going on to every secondary school site this week, a Kerbeck sign that is a congratulatory sign for graduating students that has proven to be a very popular location for families to take photos. And those signs are up now, and they will be up until into the first week of July, I believe. And in many cases, we've relocated them so that they're well situated for the photo and not necessarily on the street corner. The other piece, and I believe the Associate Director alluded to it, is we've been working on recognition items, and we do have for our graduating students a memorabilia box that is a little celebratory box that has both the district logo and they're customized. Each school will have the school logo, and that box is filled with things that would help in a celebration: balloons, confetti, those sorts of fun kind of items. So there are some pieces there, and then that's supported with the social media pieces, and each school has a grad page on their website. And that's customized again to the school colors and logos, and working on supports to school staff to populate those.
Thank you for that. I'm really glad to hear that there's so much going on, because parents are certainly, this is the thing I'm hearing about all day and all night. So thank you very much for moving this ahead.
Thank you very much. And moving on to Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that there's a lot of frustration out there, but there's an awful lot I understand that is also going on quite invisibly and under the radar at our schools. Certainly what I'm hearing from the elementary and secondary schools in my zone, people are being very active in trying to get something good for kids put together that they can still do. My question through you is just in terms of the constraints. If, for example, parent volunteers did want to try to organize something, it seems to me I read something about if you're going to do an in-person thing, you have to have contact information for everybody who is there, and there would still be masking and everything else. So I just wonder how many constraints there really are around how anything outdoors could be managed, even with the best will in the world.
Certainly, I believe we're still at a limitation of 10 at a time for an outdoor gathering. And certainly if it's, I know there's some exceptions around, ceremonies of worship and things of that nature, but correct me if I'm wrong, executive officer or anyone, but I think it's still targeting 10, which a school council or parent-led event would have to hit. As well, we're not in a position to share contact information for all of our students with school councils. So, getting invitations and appointments or whatever organized would be would be very problematic. There would be a number of barriers and obstacles to look at. And I still think whatever could be pulled off or arranged probably would not be substantially more significant than what we're intending to organize, through the day schools, just with all those restraints that are in place.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate all of the thought and effort that has gone into trying to get us around the challenges that we're facing.
Thank you very much, Trustee Scott. And Ms. Moulison, go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to touch because there's a lot of chat on school councils jumping in here and trying to throw together ceremonies. I know a lot of parent councils, school councils were just as shocked as I'm sure the board was when the premier came out and decided to announce, hey, we're going to throw ceremonies in 2.5 weeks, especially when a lot of councils know just how busy teachers and administrators are wrapping up into the end of the year. And so are councils and so are parents, especially with a lot of kids. When you're talking the elementary kids, they're home. And with a lot of high school students, they're still working and doing their job and making sure their kids are following the school curriculum and everything. So I think a lot of parent councils will be very understanding in this. You may have some that will want to try and help out and do something. Most of the ones that have been very good about working with their principals and whoever's in the school about trying to make sure that everyone stays within the regulation, and anyone who has reached out understands that the board still hasn't finalized everything. So a lot of them are still waiting to see when the memorandums come out, what's coming out and what will be permitted. But logistically, I think a lot of people and your chairs and stuff in the parent council do understand that it's not necessarily as simple as the premier likes to make it look, throwing together something in just a couple of weeks, and that you're not necessarily going to see, all these parent councils reach out, but you will have some that will say, hey, let's see if we can work together and do something. But I know we at OCASC will make sure that anyone who does, we will help them, but we won't. We'll make sure that everyone follows any guidelines that are in place, any rules that are put in place, not only by the province, but also by the board, because it's important that we keep everyone safe, especially going into the summer. So I just wanted to throw that out there on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further comments or questions on the COVID-19 update? And seeing none, let's move on in our agenda to item 8, reports from statutory and other committees. And do we have a mover to confirm the advisory committee on equity minutes of April 29th, 2021? Trustee, anyone to move receipt of those minutes? Trustee Blackbird, thank you very much. Are there any errors and or omissions to those minutes? Seeing none, I'd like to call the question on receipt of those minutes. All those in favor? And opposed? And thank you very much, and that passes. Moving on to the SEAC Special Education Advisory Minutes of May the 5th, 2021. Do I have a mover to receive those minutes? Trustee Boothby, thank you very much. Are there any errors and or omissions? Seeing none, I'd like to call the question on that. All those in favor? And opposed? Thank you, that passes. And the Parent Involvement Committee minutes of May the 12th, 2021. Do we have a mover? Trustee Huff, thank you very much. Are there any errors and or omissions? Seeing none, I'd like to call the question on receipt of those minutes. All those in favor? And that passes. Thank you very much. Next, we have the Audit Committee report of May the 19th, 2021. Do we have a mover?
Yeah, I'll move, Keith.
Thanks. Trustee Fisher. Are there any errors and or omissions? Trustee Bell, you have your hand up. Sorry. Seeing none, are there, like to call a question on that? All those in favor of receiving those minutes? And opposed? And thank you, that passes. And finally, the Indigenous Education Advisory Council minutes of May 20th, 2021. We have a Trustee Huff, thank you very much. Are there any errors and or omissions? Seeing none, I'd like to call the question on that report. All those in favor of receipt? And opposed? And that passes. Thank you very much. Before we get to the presentation of the next report, 21-049, it's 8:41. I would suggest that we have a break until 8:50. I know it's just a touch early, but it's going. I'd rather have it the discussion uninterrupted with the report, if that's okay. So let's see everyone at 8:50. All right, everyone, let's get started again. If you could turn your cameras on so I know if we have quorum. All right, thank you very much. And let's get started again. And we're on agenda item number 8, matters for discussion, report 21-049, presentation of the policy and practice review of police involvement in schools. And I'm going to call upon the director to introduce the report.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. In tonight's report, we're presenting trustees the consultation report on police involvement in the OCDSB. In our letter of transmittal, we reflect our perspective as staff and our contemplation about the way forward. We appreciate that the conversation is about our practices in the OCDSB for engaging and serving students in a safe and nurturing space. Considering the feedback on the consultation and certainly the delegations that we heard today, we certainly recognize that we all in the OCDSB, in our schools and in our administrative roles have a lot of work to do in our practice and in the nature of our engagement with our community partners. I will reiterate that there remains a legal responsibility for law enforcement in our schools. However, and this is reflected in both reports, the LOT and the report you received. However, the report also calls us to action to manage, curate, and activate that relationship in a judicious manner, to mitigate harm, and to ensure that we care for our students and center our students in the context of compliance with our legal responsibilities. So I just wanted to put that framework around the conversation because again, certainly ringing through the report as well as the letter of transmittal, this is there's a centrality to the notion that there's a difference between intent and impact. And we want to ensure that we are also focusing the conversation on policies, practices, and structures that have systemically created a challenge, but rather than pointing fingers at individuals or individual roles, because that certainly was never our intent. And so at this point, I'd like to pass the mic, if you will, over to Superintendent Farish, who has been leading this work and has been a key contact in the work, and to recognizing our Human Rights and Equity Advisor, Carolyn Tanner, for a monumental task of community engagement, which you will see reflected in the report, given the number of voices that have been heard to date. So at this point, over to you, Superintendent Farish.
Thank you very much, Director Williams-Taylor. And through you, Chair, I would like to begin the presentation of report number 21-049. To begin this presentation this evening, I want to start with an acknowledgement, and I will borrow from the content on page 2 of the HREA's report, which is Appendix A. The OCDSB asked Indigenous students, families, staff, and communities to come forward and share their truth about the education system, and their truth about the police. These truths are tied to legacies of trauma inflicted by colonialism, the residential school system, and the failure to prioritize and protect missing and murdered Two-Spirit people, women, and girls. Recognizing and honoring this truth is important to find the good path forward toward reconciliation. In addition to Indigenous participants, all students, community members, and staff who participated in this review took risks to share their experiences, and in some instances, they had to relive painful moments as part of this consultation process. We are thankful for all the individuals who courageously shared their lived experiences. The feedback shared by participants reflects their lived experiences, and as such, their perspectives and documented impacts that represent a continuum of outcomes. We recognize that intersections in identity influence how a person experiences the world. And we also recognize that identity groups are not a monolith with just one perspective or position. I want to acknowledge also the contributions and engagement with the steering team members, composed of students, parents and caregivers, advisory committee representatives, and community organization representatives. As technical lead of the review and author of the report that you have as Appendix A, I would also like to acknowledge Carolyn Tanner for her leadership in the review development, the review process, and in the remarkable production of the review report that serves as a guide and provides advice to staff on the way forward. As the purpose from Report 21-049 outlines, we are here to present the report completed by Carolyn Tanner in her role as Human Rights and Equity Advisor to the OCDSB. The HREA's report responds to the trustee motion from September 22nd, 2020, directing a review of policy on police involvement in schools, including the role or roles of the resource officer. In this presentation this evening, we are responding to the observations made by the HREA in her report to inform the upcoming policy revision. I want to place attention in the area of this report, item number 2, that speaks to the strategic links that we have identified for this work in its creation, its completion, and in our response. As a reminder, we are guided in our leadership by the goals within the strategic plan. Champion high learning expectations for all students. Remove barriers to equity of access, opportunities, and outcomes. Prioritize the dignity and well-being of students in inclusive and caring classrooms, and build authentic engagement with and among our communities. And grounded in the OCDSB Indigenous Equity and Human Rights Roadmap, we remain committed to centering principles of human rights, Indigenous rights, equity in policies, practices, and decision-making, and identifying and removing disparity of outcomes. I would like to use a quote from the HREA's report on page 10. We have to stop prioritizing the good experiences over the violence experienced by others. The review and subsequent report followed a human rights approach, which allows voices from identity groups that are marginalized and most negatively impacted by discipline in our schools to be centered. The approach through this review and the subsequent report ensures that all students' experiences, safety, and well-being were prioritized and acted upon, not just the experiences of the majority. The HREA's report contains feedback from stakeholder groups who engaged in consultation activities, including facilitated and individual discussions, survey completion, and written submissions. It also contains relevant literature and reference to other district studies or reviews. Voices in the report include secondary school students, parents, guardians, caregivers, school administrators and staff, as well as central employees and past and current members of the school resource officer team. The report connects the perspectives heard and the impacts shared by participants to the OCDSB policy and practices. To frame our response to the HREA's report, I have selected some quotations from the stakeholder feedback and input. I hope it is also clear that some perspectives are more important than others when this report is made. No one should be intimidated or unsafe at school. No amount of harm is acceptable. In our response to the report, we reflect that changes do need to be made to limit police engagement in schools, create monitoring and accountability mechanisms for when police do need to be involved, and to recenter the engagement, welcoming, and success of all students in the school setting. Our response also reflects the ongoing partnership we have with Ottawa Police Service to achieve productive intersections in service of youth and families through our shared legislative obligations. The district shares stakeholders with OPS, and we are committed to shaping our partnership activities to improve services for students who experience disproportionality, negative outcomes through our practices. Maintaining a positive relationship with all community partners is the cornerstone of effective community involvement and engagement. The relationship the district has with OPS reflects a shared focus on and commitment to youth safety and healthy development. As outlined in the HREA's report, current OCDSB police involvement practices includes involvement of police in supporting progressive discipline and in activities intended to build positive relationships and engagement for promotion of safe school cultures and climates. With respect to progressive discipline, we know from reports of our practices on suspension data that there is disproportionality and disparity for equity-deserving groups. With respect to building positive relationships and safety in school, the observations presented in the HREA's report question the hypothesis that relationship building with police through resource officers in schools achieves positive outcomes for students and the intended objectives of the program as it currently operates. The observations presented in the HREA's report also question the belief that presence of police officers in schools makes school a safer place. Feedback from participants in the consultation did not confirm either assumption. As stated previously, the HREA's report issues guidance and recommended considerations for decisions and direction with respect to the future OCDSB practices when involving OPS. The guidance will be reflected upon to draft the revised policy document for presentation to the Board of Trustees in fall of 2021. We believe that our schools must be places where students feel empowered and elevated in reaching their potential, set by high expectations of them, matched with conditions that support their achievement. Students who are not only welcomed, but expected and supported to excel in our school climates and cultures, in the bodies and identities that they live, as well as with the knowledge, skills, and talents that they bring. And we heard that the outcomes of harm experienced for stakeholder groups, whom we have centered as priority voices in this review, that we know our practices are implicated in these outcomes. We learned that the historic and current experiences of some stakeholder groups that have with the institutions of education and law enforcement are also compelling factors impacting their experience in school. Taken from page 10 of the HREA's report, we have learned that for some, experiences of trauma, fear, distrust, and distress are not removed or isolated because the environment has changed from community to school. If the triggering factor remains constant, we risk harm of forcing reliving and re-experiencing. We want to be clear that the personal integrity of any individual or their intentions, both district and OPS staff, is not in dispute or meant to be judged in the examination of this review, nor in the examination of the observations or in the response of the HREA's report. We also want to be clear that the examples of the positive relationships, interactions, and outcomes in some instances do not mitigate nor neutralize the harm expressed by many stakeholders from minoritized identities who spoke about a level of distrust and fear felt in response to our involvement of police in schools. It was clear from these stakeholder groups' reports that distrust and fear is not being addressed or repaired in the types of activities that are intended through police involvement in schools. And in fact, The presence of police in their schools intensifies their negative feelings and experiences in our schools. We hope that what is clear from this review report and our response to it is that we have heard the voices from stakeholders, and it is evident that reflection of our practice is indeed required, and that it is the voices of students, families, and staff who are impacted the most, who we need to listen to and to understand. The voices heard and prioritized in this review indicate that a reshaping of the district's partnership with OPS in service of student and school safety is necessary. As such, the 2021 staff recommended budget will not include a continuation of the investment in the Memorandum of Understanding with OPS in any amount. Current OCDSB practices and operations within our partnership with OPS will be suspended while we calibrate our relationship through the policy revision process. And the policy revisions will consider the range and profundity of the impacts and perspectives from the voices collected through consultation activities and documented in the HREA's report. The draft revised policy will be presented to the Board of Trustees for approval in the fall of 2021. Thank you for consideration of this report, and we look forward to the important discussion this evening. Joining us in the meeting is System Principal for Safe Schools, Colin Anderson, Principal at Ridgemont Secondary School, Rochelle Sintic, and Principal at Gloucester High School, Andrew Perrant, who, in addition to Carolyn Tanner and I, can help to provide clarification and/or information to support your discussion.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. And we have some questions. We'll start with Trustee Lara.
I would like to thank staff for the report. I do have a couple of questions and then some comments, and we'll go from there. My first question is on page 17. It says, the list does not include training on working effectively with children and youth, nor does it include training on anti-racism or cultural awareness. When we had the police chief in December, we were led to believe that these officers received additional training. Could you elaborate on the discrepancy between those statements and what is in the report?
Through you, Chair. Thank you for the question. I can't speak to the difference between what was presented to you by Chief Slowly and what was uncovered in the review. Perhaps Carolyn can provide detail that can help clarify, but we certainly wouldn't be able to provide any information about the different information.
If I may, I can just direct you to Appendix 12. Appendix 12 is a list of the training that OPS provided to me when I requested information about the types of trainings that school resource officers have. It's on page 138 of the report. And there are 3 different types of training that they must complete before they start service. And then there are a number of trainings that they complete as it becomes available during their service as an SRO. But I can't speak to any differences between what may have been said at the meeting and this. The training around youth typically focuses on diversion and understanding how to apply the Youth Criminal Justice Act and how they would do that in their role as the SRO. Thanks.
All right, thank you. I will move the recommendation on page 11. Is that good, Keith?
This is a discussion item, Trustee Lara.
Okay.
So you don't have action on this right now. This is just a discussion report for discussion and not an action report.
Are you saying I can't move a recommendation that is in the staff report that we got?
The item is a discussion item, Trustee Lyra. So it does have some interim observations, I guess. The report was released with some things that we need to think about moving forward, but there's no specific action that we are proposing to take at this time. I believe that Trustee Scott has maybe something to say about that later on. So
we get reports and they say recommendation. And this one has recommendation 1 that the OCDSB end its participation in the school resource officer program, and recommendation 2 that the OCDSB revise and harmonize all relevant contractual obligations, policies, and procedures to limit police involvement in schools. Why can't I move that?
because this is item for discussion, Trustee Lara.
Okay, there are amendments I would like to make to these recommendations.
Yes, we're not at the point where we're making recommendations because this is only an interim report, Trustee Lara.
So we can put nothing on the floor.
No, nothing on the floor at this time. If you have some observations about the report, if you have questions on the report, if you have items that you'd like to discuss about the report, if you have things that you like to talk about with regards to our practice in the school board, then certainly we're open to discuss that. That's what this forum is for.
With respect, Chair, I believe you have made the wrong call.
Okay.
I would like to challenge your decision on that.
All right. So, Executive Officer, could you and help me out with this? And let me know the procedure to go ahead.
So this particular item was presented as a discussion item on the agenda, and it was approved as a discussion item on the agenda. And so it's not at this point a substantive item. And so it isn't set up for trustees to make decisions on tonight. And so at agenda planning, there was a discussion about how to structure the agenda. And the decision was that it would be important for trustees to have an opportunity to receive the report, given the breadth of the report, and to have an opportunity for discussion without having to get to decision-making at the time that the report is presented. And so it's a practice that the board has often used. That doesn't preclude future action on the report. It just was intended to create a space for opportunity. So at the time that the agenda was approved, it was approved as a discussion item, meaning that no substantive action would be taken on it tonight. So there is a mechanism in the bylaws for substantive items for the board to change their action, but it has to be an urgent or pressing item. And so, and it requires a significant vote. So if we wanted to make it a substantive business item, i.e. an action item, we would have had to have done that at the time we approved the agenda, at the start of the meeting.
What is the process for amending the agenda? I was under the impression this could be actioned.
So it can be actioned, and let me be very clear. There can be action at a subsequent meeting, but at this particular meeting, it's not a motion that we're moving onto the floor. So in terms of adding substantive items during the meeting, so after the agenda has been approved, it's a pretty high test. I've got to find the rules. It requires a 3/4 majority vote of the elected or appointed members to add an urgent substantive item to the approved agenda during the course of the meeting because an extreme urgency has arisen. The addition of a substantive item is debatable. And the reason the board established that high test to change the nature of the business is to ensure that all members were aware that an item was going to be on the agenda and that action, i.e. a substantive item, action would be taken. So this agenda was set up for discussion purposes only. I believe that in your earlier, several folks have indicated a desire to bring forward a motion at the board meeting, and notice of motion for board is perfectly in order, but not in order for this evening.
So one of the things you mentioned was that we can call a vote to make this a substantive item. I would like to do that.
Mr. Chair, just for clarification from staff, and sorry, Trustee Lyra, to interrupt you, I just want some clarification here. My understanding of this item was that this report is coming from the independent Human Rights and Equity Advisor to the board. This is not a recommendation from staff that's on the table. It is a report that's coming. So it's a different entity than what we would normally see from the staff in terms of a recommendation coming from a staff report. Am I correct in that assumption?
That's correct. The letter of transmittal does not contain any recommendations at this time.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
I would like to move that we change this to a substantive debate item. I believe we have heard from members of the community in our delegation process that it is pressing. And I believe we should take action on it immediately.
So what exactly are you moving, Trustee Lara?
That we change this to an action item so that we can do something about the recommendations put forward in this report.
Okay, I would like to briefly consult with the chair and with the executive officer with regards to how we can go about having that motion forward, if that's okay.
Chair, if I may.
Go ahead, Madam Director.
I just need to ensure that that I underscore the clarification that the executive officer provided about the nature of the reports that were shared today. So when we look at the HREA report, it so happens that our HREA, which is an arm's length to us, is a part of our team here. We could have easily have, which some other boards have done, outsourced it. So this is like looking at a report from an outside entity, which is not a part of our practice to take recommendations from a consultation report and turn it into a recommendation per se by the Board of Trustees. So I just want to, if trustees may make a different kind of decision, but I just want to ensure there's a clarity to understanding what the recommendations and the suggestions for a way forward are that are identified in the report from the HREA. They were never intended to be recommendations to the Board of Trustees for a vote. So it's just a contextual piece that I just want to ensure that we clarify.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair.
Yes, Trustee Campbell.
Yes, thank you. For me, anyway, some of this debate, we're eating up time with all this, but anyway, some of this question to me is whether the HREA's report is a report to staff or the HREA's report is a report to the board. Just as we had the when we had outside person brought in to provide recommendations to the board around conflict of interest breaches, that was a report to the board, though by an outside entity. So I guess the question for me is who that report is made to.
Would you like me to respond, Chair?
Oh, go ahead, Madam Director.
So I guess it is a question of semantics and drawing lines. I'm not really sure that we went through that exercise. From our perspective, we were charged to do something by the Board of Trustees. So the motion was to the staff to undertake an examination. And so we did go through our HREA to do that. And then we are providing you with the report as requested. From our perspective, it is a report to the trustees through staff, which is why we have the LOT on it, and that it is in fact being provided to you as per your request through the work that we've undertaken to meet the direction that we have been undertaken. So the report came to us, and we are complying with the charge that we were given by trustees and providing you with the report that was supplied to us through our HREA.
So it is advice to the board. Okay, thank you.
All right, so I was wondering if we could, let me think about this here for a second.
Mr. Chair, did the executive officer not say we've passed an agenda and this item is for discussion and we can't change it? Is that what you said, executive officer?
The agenda has been approved and the item is a discussion item. In order to change the agenda at this point during the meeting, a 3/4 majority vote of elected members is required in order to do that. So,
but didn't you have a caveat that it has to be?
It has to be urgent.
Urgent?
Urgent substantive item. So that's a test that the board has, the mover has to make a decision or has to argue that it's urgent. And then the committee decides by way of voting in favor or against. It requires 3/4 of and 3/4 of the board. So all elected members, so 9 of 12 in order for that motion to carry at this point.
Thank you for
And the chair has the opportunity to rule if the motion is in order or not in order. If the chair rules the motion is in order, then the motion proceeds to a vote. If the chair decides the motion is out of order, then a member may challenge the chair, and then there's an election on the challenge, a vote on the challenge of the chair.
Thank you, Executive Officer.
Thank you for that clarification, Executive Officer. And since this was, and based upon the previous explanations of both the Executive Officer and the Director, I am going to rule that the that motion is out of order.
Do I not get a chance to explain why I believe it is both urgent and substantive?
You can choose to challenge the chair's ruling if you wish.
Okay, I believe you've made the wrong decision because this motion, what we have heard from the members of our community who came forward today, who have written to us, is that this is important and it needs to be done immediately, not in a week. There are harm that is being perpetrated and we have no reason to push it off any longer. I don't understand why we would make a decision not to, at the very least, discuss doing something as soon as we can. Do we want children in the next week to undergo trauma? Do we want children in the next week to undergo systemic racism? We have the opportunity to do something immediately. It is both urgent and pressing that we do something actionable now.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
All right.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Trustee Campbell.
Yes, thank you. I was wondering if the chair had a rationale for their ruling.
Yes, I also have. I have a chair for my ruling that it is out of order because it was designed to be discussion item number 1. The discussion item is coming from an independent body. That is, it is not designed to be an action item. It needs to be vetted by staff first. And as of right now, we have, as a board, we have not had any substantive discussion nor contemplation of this item. To have it immediately come to an action item, I think is not the right thing to do right now. I recognize what Trustee Alara is saying. However, I think we need to follow our procedure as designed. All right, so Trustee Alara.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes.
Please, just noting one thing, and that is that this is, whether you like it or not, it is committee of the whole, which means that there are no final decisions that can be made tonight in any event. the first opportunity for a final decision to be made is when the report from this committee meeting goes to the board on the 21st. And as has previously been noted by the executive officer, several trustees have already expressed interest in bringing potential actions to that board meeting.
That is correct, and you are right. You have not spoken yet, Trustee Scott, on this item, but yes, it's true that I believe that there are some pending notices for that board meeting that will have some action to them. So given that, Lara, do you still?
I think it would be in the best interests of the board to be able to discuss these things in the committee of the whole setting and then take some time and then come back at board if it is the earliest time we could possibly pass it.
So do you wish to challenge my ruling that your motion is out
I
of order?
continue to believe you have made the wrong ruling, yes.
Okay. And so that will entail, I believe, Manager Drew, does that entail Executive Officer Drew, does that entail me to call a vote on my ruling?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. The right way of phrasing it is, shall the ruling of the chair be upheld? And that's the question you call. So the chair has ruled that the motion is out of order and your request is, shall the ruling of the chair be upheld?
All right, so I have the list of all the speakers.
Mr. Chair?
Who's speaking?
Sorry, Trustee Campbell, just a question to staff. And that is if I recall, the voting count procedures somewhat different or not. I can't remember. It's been a while since there's been one of these.
The count, sorry, for the challenge to the chair?
Yeah.
So the chair, I'm just looking forward in the bylaws and I don't have Curran King with me, and so maybe Manager Guthrie does. And she can help me out. The chair does not vote directly on the motion, but the chair is assumed to be in support of his or her own ruling, in this case, his ruling. And so that's the only mechanism. Manager Guthrie, if you have Curran King, and there's any other clarification, but I believe that's correct.
Point of order. Does the nature of this item being a discussion item in Robert's rules, does that prevent Trustee Lyra from moving a substantive motion? Like, do we need to necessarily?
We're discussing that right now, Trustee Liu.
The OCDSB does not follow Robert's Rules of Order. The board has its own bylaws and standing rules, and it follows Curran King as a default. But the board's bylaws have very clear provisions. And in fact, this board's provisions with respect to the amendments to substantive items are a very high test that was approved by the board itself to address particular circumstances where, such as this, where you might change a discussion item from an action item. As was noted, this item was intended for discussion this evening so that everybody had an opportunity for fulsome discussion. And at the board meeting, action can be taken. No action that would be taken tonight in the event that the challenge to the chair is not held and the board chooses to move to an action item. That cannot come into effect until after the board meeting. And so at a certain level, right now we're using time on the process rather than the discussion on the item, but that's the will of the committee.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, I have the bylaws in front of me right now, and it indicates that as the executive officer has stated, the chair does not vote on the appeal. The decision of the chair is upheld if there is a tie or a majority of votes cast in favor of the chair's ruling.
Penny, just in the interest of not wasting the trustees' time, I just want to make sure that people recognize that what is being proposed has already been identified in the conclusion of the LOT. The LOT reads in the conclusion section, it speaks to the fact that we will not be funding any further SRO designation, but in paragraph 2, it says, in response to the stakeholder perspectives represented in the report, current practices and operations within our partnership with OPS will be suspended while we recalibrate our relationship through the policy revision process in the fall. So there is actually an immediate suspension of all engagement at this point that has been identified already in the conclusions of this report. So I just don't want that to be overlooked in the event that this might be a repetition that the trustees may be undertaking.
Okay, so moving forward, I have ruled that Trustee Lyra's motion to make it a substantive motion is out of order. And I'd like to have, I've got the speakers list right now written down, but shall the chair's ruling be upheld? All those in favor? And opposed? All right, so that the chair's ruling of out of order is upheld. So we're going back to the list, Trustee Lara, and you still have some time.
So I believe that the OCDSB has done wrong by our community. I believe that it is incumbent upon us to issue a formal apology in accordance with the Apologies Act for all students and former students who have been negatively impacted by the existence of this program. I believe that we should be discussing looking at creating a fund to help people who have had traumatic experiences at the hands of police. I would like to see us discuss mental health supports for current and former students who have had these negative experiences. I think these are all incredibly important pieces to the continuation of this discussion.
Right,
I have no further questions.
Okay.
You want to discuss this? These are things I think we should discuss.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to student trustee Liu.
Thank you. First, some comments, then I'll get into my questions. So firstly, I'm disappointed by the decision to make this item a discussion item as opposed to an action item. I think the findings of a year-long or months-long review paired with community consultations make now the time as opposed to 2 weeks to make a decision on these matters, to be moving motions about things like ending the SRO program. So I just wanted to float that. Okay, in addition to this, I think what's clear to point out firstly is that throughout the entire report, in every section, the recommendations involve minimizing police presence. I think this is something that that is really important to highlight, because the second official recommendation talks about harmonizing policies and procedures, but it's really important to summarize this theme that throughout the entire report, the recommendations in each section talk about minimizing these interactions with police. And it's also important to note that that by reducing police involvement is something that that for our board to reduce police involvement to what's only provincially mandated is in opposition, or is in contrast to our current practices. Because if you look on Appendix 13, most calls going to SROs by school administration are for discretionary incidents. So things like dysregulated behavior, things like students leaving home or school without permission. These are the discretionary choices that are being made by school administration right now. And I think that flies in the face of And I think our current practices fly in the face of what is recommended. Secondly, I think that the main premises of the SRO program and the justifications for its existence have been undermined. Like the two main justifications for this program to exist are firstly, this idea of relationship building, and secondly, the idea that you have people trained with youth who are able to work with youth. Like the reviews demonstrate that on page 31, perceptions of youth of the police are not changed through interaction with the SROs, and in fact are oftentimes negative. But secondly, like the appendix list of training does not include working with like trainings explicitly and working with youth and on things like anti-racism and cultural awareness. So I think that the review also neatly summarizes that the reasons that justify the SRO program's existence don't hold up. Like they're not, there's no water to them. Okay, on to my questions. Firstly, when will the next revision of the local agreement, aka the protocol to accompany safe schools, take place? Because it's hopefully not in 2022, which is as per the 2-year cycle when it would take place. I'm hoping to see this revision happen sooner and this renegotiation happen sooner. Is that possible?
Through you, Chair.
Madam Director.
Thank you, Trustee Liu, for the question. I can start, but Assistant Principal Anderson may have some detail to share. So Trustee Liu, part of, as you know from the recommendations, part of the recommendations coming from the report are to harmonize all documents, and that would include the local protocol. And so if when we look at what we put into our policy revision, we would also be looking at how that fits within the different policies that we have within the district, including that protocol. And so with substantive difference in our policy, which I think you'll see in the conclusion statement of the LOT, then it would require there to be an adjustment to the protocol that would be ahead of cycle. I don't know what the scheduled cycle is, although there is a requirement for the local protocol to be reviewed. But I think the cycle is listed actually in the report itself, and it might be annual if not every 2 years. But again, we would be moving forward to make adjustments as required, and that would be work that would come as a result of the revised policy itself.
Is it possible to engage in a renegotiation this year? Because this isn't something we can move on unilaterally, because it's a negotiation also with the other school boards and with the OPS.
Through you, Chair. I think that we can, Board of Trustees directs us through policy. So if our policy direction is such that we are no longer in compliance with that protocol, our own policy would dictate our actions and activities. And so it's not really a negotiable thing in terms of the other parties to the protocol. They bring their own set of policies that are required of them by their Board of Trustees. And so it's not so much that all parties have to agree with our stance, it's that we bring our direction forward from our policy into that protocol. And I'm not sure that something would be, until we have the revised policy, I don't think that we would have direction to go to the protocol to make the amendments on behalf of the director at that, until we have the revised policy.
I would like to be put back on the speakers list again, but before that, a second question. The appendix doesn't include a summary of a separate summary of perspectives from the Arabic speaking and Mandarin speaking group discussions. I was wondering why that is the case.
I'll ask the HREA to respond.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the Mandarin discussions were specifically related to the development of a human rights policy. We didn't offer those discussions in relation to the police policy. For the Arabic speaking discussions, we held a discussion. We had turnout of about 9 people. their perspectives are reflected throughout the report, but I wasn't really able to triangulate the information from that with information that came through in the survey and from other sources, because we didn't ask questions about language. When we were collecting identity in the survey, we asked questions about race. So it was difficult to really add additional value through additional analysis. So I did make sure that the perspectives that came through were reflected through comments that were pulled into the different themes, and the themes that came up were reflected there, but I didn't have a separate section at the end for that reason.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. And I'll put you back on the list, student trustee View. Moving on to trustee Fisher, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And, want to thank staff for the lengthy report and the very insightful report. Obviously, it's an understatement saying that this is an incredibly good and decision for the trustees and the board. And we all know that this report and review is certainly long overdue, and a report that I welcome. And I want to thank, Trustee Lyra, for being such a strong voice and really pushing the board, to get this work started and completed. And I think from my perspective, I'm really approaching this report from a number of different sort of vantage points. One, as a school board, per the in loco parentis doctrine, we have a duty of care for students in place of their parents or guardians when we're responsible for their well-being and learning. More personally, my mother, spent her career working in the juvenile correctional system in Ontario. And I would say that she dedicated her career to focusing on rehabilitation and restorative justice well before they became mainstream approaches. And I think finally, my father was a 35-year veteran of the Toronto Police Service in the second busiest division in Canada. He was very committed to public safety and even more committed to community building every day of his career. From all of these vantage points, after reading the report, it's clear to me that the SRO program is not working. It's not working for our board. It's not working for our students. And I dare say it's not meeting the objectives that the Ottawa Police Service has set out for itself. In fact, based on the testimony and feedback provided, it's clear that it's harmed many of our students, especially our BIPOC and LGBTQ plus students. And if anything, it's eroded trust rather than build relationships. But while I was troubled by the impact of the SRO program on our students, I was perhaps even more troubled by how our students feel and that they were treated or how they were treated by the board's own employees. And it's clear to me that as an institution, we have a lot of work to do with respect to employee conduct, our disciplinary practices, school resourcing, and how we engage and communicate with our communities. So I guess the question I have for staff is, in some respects, making the decision around suspending the SRO program, canceling it altogether, in some respects is the simpler decision. What I want to know in terms of discussion and reports that will come forward is how much detail would this board of trustees receive about how we're going to respond to those other institutional issues that were raised in the report. Because if we leave those issues alone, we're addressing such an important but a small part, I think, of the very real concerns that our students and our communities have brought forward as part of this review. So I'd just like to get a better sense of how are we going to address some of those other institutional issues that have been brought forward in this very insightful and lengthy report. Thank you.
I'll get started on the response to that question because I think it is a very key question, and I do thank the trustee for positioning that, because our focus is as we receive this report as staff, it is a question of how it is that we are navigating our own decisions in terms of the students for whom we are responsible. And so when the trustee asked the questions about what are the steps, there are some very key and clear steps that need to be undertaken that have already started to be undertaken. I would call the trustees' attention to some of the quotes that are a part of the consultation that have been identified in the report. where a number of employees, particularly administrators, recognize the fact that the impact on students has been a profound one that they have overlooked, and their interest in ensuring that they do better by our students. So it becomes a question as to not only how it is that that aspiration is articulated, but how do we train and enable people to do that? And then how do we hold them accountable for it? A part of the report speaks to the fact that there are accountability measures that need to be a part of any steps that we undertake. These we submit will be a part, which should be reflected in any policy. So when we talk about, for example, the gathering of data and information about police calls or external discipline measures, that is a part of the report. It is an accountability measure, and it is a recommendation that we take as a recommendation to our practice that would be reflected in policy and procedure. So that's one example, but certainly we read the report from the point of view of a reflection on our practice as the OCDSB local parentis to cite the report and yourself, Trustee Fisher. But I would say to you that certainly the process has unveiled to our staff the impact, unintended or otherwise, that some of these practices have had, and the clarity around the changes. I won't regale you with the training. I did get a list from our equity staff about the training and work that has already been undergone. And I do have some of that material, but the question becomes, what is the accountability for implementation? And so that becomes the next step forward. Superintendent Parrish, I don't know if I've left anything out, but I felt compelled to enter the conversation.
Thank you, Director Williams-Taylor, and through you, Chair. I'll just also add that the way that we are working as superintendents of instruction with school leaders to support them in development of cultures and climates that promote positive school cultures and are bias, what we refer to as bias aware, the ministry refers to it as bias-free progressive discipline. That work continues and is very much aligned with the milestones and the action items coming out of the roadmap in the 6 areas. So you'll see this work that we're doing, as Director Williams-Taylor referenced, in terms of the actual training that is precise and explicitly connected to the areas in the roadmap itself. So if you think about those areas, where the first area is accountability. We're focusing on identity of our students. So who are our students? Then we're looking at awareness and building staff capacity. That's exactly what we're talking about here. And the milestones are there. The deliverables must be met. We talk about representation. So you'll also see that in who we're hiring, who we are coaching and mentoring, who we're supporting to be leaders in our schools, to represent students and communities that we have, and to make good decisions that reflect the identities of our students and their experiences. You'll also see a reference to programs. So thank you to Chair Scott for referencing curriculum and the impact of curriculum and the ways that our learning, because we're a learning organization, how that has the leverage and the high yield for us to change cultures and climates and outcomes, certainly. And then you'll see that the last area is for authentic engagement and connectedness, so that we see this as a process, not that we do in isolation, but that we do, school is a subset of community. We do that together, and we're informed on the work that we need to be doing through the expertise that exists within our communities, in our students, in their families, and in our communities. And so I can be more precise about the Safe Schools suite of policies that we're bringing forward for approval by trustees in the fall as well, and the implementation of those that will come. There are ministry priority days of training that are coming up that require us to spend time on anti-racism and other areas that would also connect with addressing the bias that we have in our decision making, and also superintendents of instruction work with school principals to take the reports that are provided to the board, the annual suspension report, and there is the achievement report that is disaggregated by identity that will come to you soon. And those reports are the focus of the work that we do with our schools as when we work with principals and vice principals and model with them the work that is required in their schools. So we do inventories of practices and look for markers of success, and we look for that to be the benchmark for where we work towards with building capacity of all. And we have really exciting initiatives already in progress and some still to come. And I want to just really demonstrate that when we talk about the strategic goals and we talk about the roadmap, we are aligning our work with the commitments that we've made there. And we feel that the work is urgent, necessary, and as Director Williams-Taylor mentioned, it is evident that many of our administrators agree with that and are eager and wanting to do the learning, wanting to do better, wanting to continue to try to get it right. And that will be accomplished in collaboration with community and our families in our schools and our community partners.
Thanks, Mary Jane. I appreciate that. Keith, how much time do I have left? I don't see a clock, and I'm.
You had negative 22 seconds, so I'm going to put you back on the list.
Oh, okay. I didn't know I spoke for that long. Okay, don't worry about it. I'll follow up offline.
Okay, no problem. Thanks, Trustee Fisher. And we're going to move on to Lily Miller. Go ahead.
Hello. I would like to speak to you in the way of my culture, in the way of a talking circle, and to say what I have to say. I won't say any more or less. So in other words, I'd like to speak without the restraints of your colonial timer. May I do so?
As long as it's not half an hour, Ms. Miller.
First of all, I want to lift up the 215 children and their parents and the community and the nation. And I also want to lift up the Muslim community with the loss of their family members who died, and also lift up the 9-year-old survivor. Hello, Kwe. My name is Lily Miller. I'm Wolastoqey and a member of the Nagutgut First Nation. I'm speaking as a First Nation community member and a member of IAC. First, Director, you said to look at this report, intent versus impact, and never the intent was to point fingers. But once you hear the truth, you need that harm is being done. You need to put the intent aside. You know, I've been told that many people don't believe that the intent behind residential schools was to harm the children, but yet they were harmed and they were harmed and they were harmed. So intent means nothing. Intent paves the road to hell, as we both know. So we need to put the intent aside and recognize what we did so we can change in the future. So last August, I spoke to you as a delegate, and I asked you to end or pause the funding for the SRO program. There was a racist threat of the police system that came to light after George Floyd's murder, after Chantel Moore's murder on June 4th, and Rodney Levi's murder on June 12th. And I said, you can no longer pretend that there's no problem with the police. But at the next board meeting, I heard comments about the SRO program, like, I don't dispute its value. And then about the people who were courageous enough to come forward, their complaints were described as anecdotal incidences. You know, I was advised that I should talk personally, you know, in my talk here, but I don't want to be an anecdotal incidents. You know, why should anyone come and speak when they're not believed? So this happens over and over to Indigenous, Black, Two-Spirit, LGBTQ2+, minoritized people. They're disregarded again and again. And this is oppression. This is racism. So to be anti-racist means you're listening and you're actively taking steps towards racial justice. So the review was important, and I'm grateful to Carolyn for doing such a great job. But it does show how the board is violating human rights. But why does it take a violation of law before you act? Why didn't you listen to the ones that came forward? So my first request is to rethink your protocol. So when an Indigenous, Black, Two-Spirit, LGBTQ2+, disabled, or other minoritized community member tells you there is harm, stop the harm, then do your study, then review, then get your data. You know, many Indigenous people already carry trauma, as well as ancestral trauma. And it's important to be cognizant of that. Be reactive. Your decision to wait, your inaction caused more harm, more trauma to kids over this past year. And my second request is for anti-racism staff to use an anti-racism lens here in board meetings, to have an ombudsman and training. As you know from your anti-racism training, your decisions are either racist or anti-racist. There's no not racist. A quote that I recently read was, inaction in the face of need is one form of institutionalized racism. So your inaction regarding the SRO program over this past year was racism. You didn't have your anti-racism lens on to see how this would be harming the kids from the BIPOC community. Racism is embedded in the education system, and we have all been immersed in it for a lifetime, and it's going to take a lifetime of continuous learning to be anti-racist. So try not to be defensive, as I've noticed that can happen to a lot of people, but be open to change. It's clear that you need an anti-racism consultant to inform your decisions. He or she can assist you applying the lens to your actions or your inactions. I would like to see an apology from the board to the children that were harmed and the former students over this past year and the years that the program has been in place. As you read from the report, some of these kids or young adults now may not ever get over the trauma. It's not easy to heal from trauma, nor is it accessible financially for many people. So I think it would be appropriate for the board to set aside a healing fund for students, former students, and their families if needed, so that they could heal either their traditional way or therapy. I also was thinking about in-school supports. What happens when the SRO program is finished? As you are all probably thinking that. Mental health is a huge issue, and we heard about developing relationships and having elders and culturally related supports in the school. They need to be there, develop relationships, build trust, have an atmosphere of respect and caring. So I'd like to consider implementing these supports in schools. You have a gap to fill. But I don't know if you have done this, but if you didn't, then it just shows me that you didn't believe that anything was going to come of this report, maybe. But have you had staff do research in what the best practices can be moving forward without police involvement? And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Trustee Campbell, go ahead.
Hang on, there was a question.
Trustee Lara.
Lily asked a question.
Chair, I'm happy to start the response to that question. And the question, I believe, was have we, Lily, could you just finish it? I didn't write it all down. Could you repeat the last part of it, please? The question you had?
Since we've had a year, knowing that this program's going to come to an end, has there been staff making plans, best practices, etc.?
Yeah, thank you, Lily. The question is an important one because that is one of the things that we started talking about a while ago, is what are the alternatives? What are the supports? Because we recognize that our students have needs, and how it is that we choose to address those needs in the interest of our students and for their well-being is a key piece. And so that work has indeed begun around what are some of the alternatives that are a part of the way forward. We actually talked about, and this goes back actually more than a year now, when we look at a focus on well-being, and we looked at how it is we're changing the Safe Schools portfolio. One of the things that Mary Jane and myself talked about is how it is that we would be investigating restorative practice as a part of how we move forward. One of the things we learned is that Indigenous communities think differently about restorative practice and the way restorative practice has been packaged. And so we need to relearn our thinking about restorative practice to reflect some of those pieces. We also have learned about how it is that some of our community partners, and in fact, just as recently as last week, Carolyn and I talked about some of the community partners who are in fact exercising different kinds of interventions for dysregulated behaviors that are more effective in supporting students. So we have indeed started to do some of those pieces, and some of it means training of our own staff, but some of it means bringing in our partners. Have we activated it in a manner that I could say is strategic and lockstep? No, I can't say that we have, but we have had a variety of different distractions over the course of this year. But we have actually started to do that work because we recognize that we need to replace a dysfunctional approach with a functional approach, and we have started to do that work. So I don't know if Mary Jane, you have anything further to add there, but that is the answer to what. So Mary Jane is nodding that I've gotten most of it. So that is the response to the question. We do continue to learn. I do have to say we're very careful because the other thing that we don't want to do is just kind of march merrily along and just, move from one thing to another thing that we're not really, just because it's packaged a certain way doesn't mean that it's going to work effectively. And we do recognize as well, and it is in the report, that our communities are not monoliths. Indigenous peoples are Indigenous peoples plural. And so one approach is not necessarily going to fit everybody. And I would say the similar thing in our Black communities, that our Black communities are not monolithic, and therefore one solution is not going to be one that fits everybody. So that is a part of the learning as well.
Thank you very much, Madam Director. So moving on to Trustee Campbell, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I believe Trustee Scott had her hand up before me.
I wrote down the order, but that's
I did
okay.
not.
Oh, you did not? Okay, that's fine. So I do have a few questions, and so unfortunately, please put me back on the list. First of all, just a question of clarification. There's no particular order. Question of clarification. In the body of the HREA's report towards the more or less the bottom, there are two recommendations, one of which is to end the priority SRO program. And then the executive summary up top, there is a similar but differently worded first recommendation to end the SRO program. And so I guess what I'm wondering is if there are two different wordings, and I guess I'd just like to be confirmed effectively what the HREA is recommending be ended. Is it priority SROs or all SROs?
Through you,
Ms.
Mr.
Tanner?
Chair. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So I believe the place that you're referring to in the body of the report is the annex that relates specifically to the priority SRO program at Gloucester and Ridgemont. And that was an analysis that was done separately to inform the budget discussions. So that's the recommendation, but the recommendation overall is to end our participation in the SRO program, period, full stop.
Great, thank you for that. When both, I guess, staff in the conveying report and the HREA, and I'm assuming they're singing from the same songbook here, refer to the suspension or the end of the SRO program. I'm thinking about the larger SRO program. Can I get an indication of what it is that they're including in that? So, for instance, if there are continued, and obviously, you know, the report is very clear in terms of the negative impacts of almost all interactions with OPS. However, there are a couple of little jewels in there which are positive, and some of them are, for instance, student-initiated requests to remove harmful internet material, which implicates them in this kind of stuff to the police. There are sort of some services which are a couple of little jewels there. So when we talk about ending the SRO program and ending, you know, or suspending all relationships with OPS during the course of the policy review, I'd just like to understand what's included and what's not included when staff talk about that, because there are two or three which seem to me to be positive things where at student request to the OPS, there may be useful services.
I'll ask, through you, Chair, I will ask Superintendent Farish to take the question.
Thank you very much. Through you, Chair. So I just, in that example, for instance, Trustee Campbell, that interaction with somebody from Ottawa Police Service to assist in response to a request from a family or from a student, that can be facilitated. It doesn't have to have presence of an SRO at the school to accomplish that. It also doesn't need to be an SRO. I think in the report, Ms. Tanner's report, you might see that there were responses to calls that didn't necessarily come from SROs, and also that patrol officers do have the same abilities in some cases to access the service.
Very good, thank you. So as pointed out in the past, we don't control the SRO program. It's up to OPS to determine what officers they do or don't assign to receive calls from school boards, right? In terms of that's their personnel allocation. Whoever we decide to invite into the schools on what basis is our decision, unless legislated. But I mean, it's up to them how they do their staffing. When we say we're going to end the SRO or suspend, as the case may be, our relationship with the SRO program, are we saying that we will, until finalized, if that's what happens, it's not ended early, they will not be invited for any non-mandatory purpose per either the provincial requirements or per the protocol, which I gather are somewhat different with respect to the list of mandatory requirements.
Through you, Chair, I would agree with your assessment of we would limit all interactions to the mandatory requirements, and I appreciate the discrepancy that's been identified in the report. So we need to examine that discrepancy before I could give you an answer on that, but that will be part of the policy revision that we look at. I'm confident that we can be prioritizing that discrepancy so that we are very clear on what we mean by mandatory notification. Again, notification is also different from response. that notification of something doesn't necessarily bring a response from OPS. And as you mentioned, it's at their discretion what that response would look like if it is necessary in terms of the officer that would attend.
Great, thank you. I do have some more questions, Mr. Chair. How am I doing on time?
You're, you want to go back on the list, Trustee?
Please
Jimenez?
do. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
No problem. Moving on to Trustee Schwartz. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just want to acknowledge the passion expressed by Lily this evening. I think it's very important that we gave you extra time to hear your voice. I think as white privileged individuals, we often hear, but we don't always listen to the truth. And I do want to acknowledge that this report for me personally has given me a lot of time for self-reflection, and I haven't always liked what I've reflected on. And so I do want to start off just by saying to staff, thanks very much for bringing forward for doing the work, doing the analysis, and actually recognizing when we actually get things wrong. When we first discussed this issue back in September, I personally thought the SRO program at the OCDSB was a good community outreach program. And as the trustee for Gloucester, I'd met the SRO and thought the officer worked well with students at the school. So, you know, at the time, after short consultation with the school council community, you know, it was clear that there were mixed views about the SRO at Gloucester. And I was in support of a review of the program. And specifically, I wanted to hear from those most impacted rather than just the majority. I really feel the need, frankly, to apologize publicly to all the students and the community members. If you didn't feel that you had an ally in me, and that if you felt that I wasn't listening to you, I really feel that I want to apologize for the harm that you've experienced from this program. And most importantly, I feel the need to apologize for forcing a report that required many to share and relive and re-experience their personal trauma. So I'm sorry. And I commit to you that I'm going to do better, and I'm going to work with my colleagues in the board to end systemic racism that exists in our school system. So I have some questions for staff, and I apologize for my emotion, but in reading the report, I think all of us should feel emotional. We should recognize that our system hasn't served all children. And that I admit, prior to the conversation in September and the subsequent review, I actually never considered the question of safety of whom. I didn't consider the SRO program would make students feel surveilled and targeted by police while at school, and that it impacted on their sense of safety and belonging in the school community. And what really stands out for me in the report is actually that, that I never actually considered the experiences of trauma aren't removed or isolated because the environment's changed from community to school. And I'm particularly disturbed to learn that it wasn't OCDSB's practice to require administrators to collect data and report on when they contact police, and that some administrators were also using SROs as part of a progressive discipline program. So staff, I just really want to ask you the question, what are the accountability measures the board is going to put in place? And to Superintendent Farish and Principal Perron, I'd like to know what measures or what the monies in lieu of an SRO might in fact be used for specifically at Gloucester. And I appreciate my colleagues' indulgence on going extra time. Sorry again for expressing emotion, but I think it was important to share in the truth we've heard.
I'll ask Superintendent Farish to pick it up because this is work she's already started to undertake. Go ahead, Superintendent Farish.
Thank you, Trustee Schwartz. Through you, Chair. Thank you to Trustee Schwartz's comments and contribution to the discussion. So I will actually ask Principal Perrant to speak to the monies, that part of the question, because they, both principals, have put a lot of thought into the supports that they currently have through the funding that they received in the grant from the ministry for urban and priorities high schools, and looking at what this will mean with the removal of an SRO as part of support to the school, and what they think they can do differently and better. So Principal Perrant, if I can request you to respond. I can't see you, so I'm hoping you're still there.
Thank you, Superintendent Farish, and through you, Chair. And I want to thank Trustee Schwartz for her comments, which echoes a lot of what we've been feeling in schools as well as we've been working through this. So there's a few different parts that Principal Sintek and I have been talking quite a lot about it as the two sites that hosted the priority SROs, and who would be changing in terms of the resourcing we receive as part of this proposal. So I don't want to speak on her behalf. I believe she's here as well. But I think what's important to note is that the reason why our two schools are designated as urban priority high schools is because of the marginalization a lot of our families find themselves in for various factors of their situations or identities. We have a higher proportion of students and families who would identify as one of many different groups of oppressed peoples in Ottawa who have been systemically mistreated or held down by our school system and society at large. So the resourcing we get as part of that program, I can't understate how important that is, or sorry, I can't overstate how important that is. It is the thing that makes our school work in service of our students is that grant and those monies as part of that program. Now, that is not about the priority SRO specifically, but we've advocated in the past that if that funding was to change or take different shape, that the pillars of the urban priority program are ones that work in service of students and community, and that's what we would advocate that it stay within. One thing that I think it's important to note, though, is that while our two schools receive this funding and are well served by it, there are many schools in similar circumstances that do not receive that funding. So I know that I'm not one to speak on their behalf because they're not here, but we have 3 ELD sites, for instance, in secondary, Woodruff being the third. It is not designated as an urban priority high school. They do not receive the same resourcing and funding that we do. And some of our associate schools, what we used to call our feeder schools, would also have similar populations, and they aren't resourced the way that we are. So while it is important to us that our community and the barriers they face are recognized and resourced appropriately to make sure that our students have the best opportunity to succeed, and that we have the ability to help them overcome some of the obstacles and challenges they face. I also want to flag for you that there are other schools who don't have what we do in our communities and in our family of schools, as well as the ELD population at Woodruff, that I think, certainly not wanting to tell trustees, how to make their budget decisions, but I would advocate that we consider the needs of the system as a whole when we talk about this allocation of funds, because the model for urban priorities works. It makes a massive difference. We've listed before some of the things that allows us to do at Gloucester that other schools just cannot do. Specific to tonight's discussion, things like, we have a diversion counselor, we have a full-time social worker, we have extra help from a school psychologist. We have all kinds of resources which are absolutely imperative for our families and students because of that program that other schools don't. So I don't want to appear before you hat in hand saying that we need everything that it is on the table in terms of redirecting this funding. Could we use it? Yes. Would it make a difference? Yes. Would our families be well served with it? Yes. But there are other needs in our system too that I think we need to consider through this discussion. And I just wanted to share that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Principal Perrant. And through you, Chair, I just wanted to answer or attempt to answer Trustee Schwartz's question about the accountability in data collection for calls to service. So although I don't have a prescribed format that we will be using, as is recommended in the in Ms. Tanner's report, there is definitely an interest and a commitment from the district that we need to have a mechanism to log and to track and to monitor and review when we do make calls to police. So that will be something that when we look at our safe schools policies along with the police involvement in school policy, that we look to include in the change of practice, and in fact look at the tools that make the most sense, so that this is something that is available to pull an extract for that type of review that we do agree is necessary and required.
Thank you very much. And we're going to move on to Ms. Lambda.
Okay, thank you. I have a few questions, but first I just wanted to, I won't repeat much of what the delegation said and Lily said, because I agree with all of that, and that was important to hear. As well, I just wanted to just recognize Trustee Schwartz in demonstrating how to be an anti-activist and not just an ally in name. So being discomfortable, recognizing, you know, you've been wrong and the mistakes, and moving forward and willing to do that so openly is commendable, right? So it's good in that way. Yes, harm has been done and it can't be undone, right? But it's moving forward. So I just wanted to acknowledge that in your journey. I had a question. So I've been listening to this, and it seems like there's like information like in sort of in piecemeal, like we're doing this, there's going to be this policy. I kind of want to know holistically what's going to happen. So June 21st, there's going to be a discussion. So I'm going to assume that there are going to be no SO, like it's going to be suspended, like the recommendations will probably likely be there. And then what? Is it going to be then the policy is created? There's already put things in practice. I'm trying to figure out how this all comes together. Sorry for my ignorance around the processes. Can someone explain to me what it's going to look like?
Through you, Chair, I can attempt to do that. And please don't apologize for the question or the confusion. That's we haven't been very clear in terms of setting out a timeline. As per the letter of transmittal that we have that presents the report, we have already committed to suspending activities with OPS. So that would include the SRO program. So that is we've brought that decision forward in terms of our response. So I can't speak to what will be an outcome out of June 21st, but that would be in addition to, or it might direct something different. But that's what I can say in terms of the staff response to the HREA's report. And I do appreciate the piecemeal presentation of the other actions and activities, and most of all the commitments that we're making to do the work, to do the learning, and then have it reflected in our policies that then are mechanisms of accountability. So we do see that the revision of the policies that are upcoming. So that's first of all, we will have a human rights policy. We will also have a suite of safe schools policies and the affiliated procedures and policies that will be aligned with those changes. And then we will have a police involvement in school policy revision. And so through those foundational documents, they anchor the accountability that we will be monitoring as we do the learning and the professional development and coaching and mentoring and working with our staff and employee groups through those pieces. And those pieces are really, as I said, really well documented in the roadmap that we have as well. So those commitments are there, and there are plans attached to those commitments as well, which we definitely hear about through the departments that are leading that, and it's collaborative work as well. So it's not It doesn't sit with one particular department, so it's not an equity department responsibility. It's multiple departments. So what I would say to you is that I'm referencing the policy revisions to come, because that really helps us to have a point of reference to say this is the standard, and then we need to work to achieve that and monitor and be accountable when we're not meeting that, and to continue, and I want to emphasize this, continue to be informed on our practices with our engagement with community. And I think that's what Director Williams-Taylor was also alluding to, that we could very easily replace one system that we felt, because of intentions of the system as they were prescribed, we could replace one system that has been harmful and oppressive with a different system. And so we can't continue to go in the direction that we've gone, which has been to really have ownership and to have our voice reflected in the way that we move forward. We have to look at an approach that is an engagement-focused approach, centering the identities of the students and families, the wisdom that they bring, the knowledge that they bring, the lived experience that they bring, and it's reflective of historical and current oppressions that exist within the systems of education itself. So it's big work, and it is beyond time, as Lily mentions, and it's work that we will continue to be doing. You're never not working to be an anti-racist in the position of a white person with privilege. You're never not working. You're never there is what I mean by that. It's constant. It's interrogating your own unexamined beliefs and assumptions. It's distrusting your own bias as you come to the table. So I'm really looking forward to some of the other achievements that we will make through our commitments in the roadmap, especially connected to representation and building a workforce that is more representative of our communities and students.
Okay, so I appreciate that. So, because I think it's important to also not replace something, and I agree, with something that's going to be also oppressive, right? Or that's going to have gaps or missing things. So I think it's really important to have one place to say, okay, no more SROs or police in the schools. And then what is that going to look like? And then it needs to be examined like from that equity lens and in that way. Because I know the Safe School was presented to the ACE committee at least. And I'm like, well, why was that sort of presented if yet we're not there yet when we're talking about SORs not being there, right? So I'm a bit confused about some of the processes that you're using and whether the lenses are all there or not still, but it would be helpful to have that, to understand that for future meetings, I think, to have a more comprehensive thing. I just wanted to note a couple of things. I'm not going to repeat everything that a lot of people have said. I did connect with my ACE counterparts who were actually on the steering committee. And they really felt like the steering committee had some input into the report, and they support the recommendations, the 2 recommendations put out there, but they wanted to stress a couple of things, and that is really around accountability. So we've had those discussions around accountability of school teachers and administrators, using that discretionary disciplinary actions and investigations, that cause harm, and to have accountability of that. Yes, we're not supposed to be pointing fingers, but you know what? If people are creating harm, we need to be making them accountable, right? So that's one thing. And then just the support of the external culturally appropriate community-based interventions for students for the harm that's already been created, right? And to help with that. So I just wanted to convey some of the thoughts from my counterparts who were Kamari Pigne and Elizabeth Sweeney, who were on the steering committee for that. So I ran out of time, sorry.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lambda. And before we move on to trustee Ellis, we have to have the 10:30 vote. So, remind trustees, it's a 2/3 vote. So all those in favor of continuing? And opposed?
Mr. Chair, I was having trouble. I was in favor.
Okay. All right, that passes. So let's continue on with trustee Ellis.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to move motion to adjourn the meeting to another date. I'd like to move that we adjourn tonight and continue on June 15th. I believe that's the Tuesday of next week. Oh, yes, to June 15th at 7 p.m. The reason I'm doing this is a half hour isn't going to cut it. There's much more discussion needed. So I think an extension of this meeting needs to be made. Thank you.
All right, so I'm just going to consult quickly with the director and the executive officer and the chair with regards to that. What do you guys, is that possible?
I believe there's a budget committee meeting scheduled on the 15th.
I'm fine with the 16th or 17th.
Trustee Ellis, would it be acceptable for you to for us to consult with the agenda planning committee tomorrow to find a suitable date in the next 2 weeks?
Certainly. Well, I would want it before the board meeting, before the 22nd. So yes, up till the 21st. But of course, the only thing that can be debated in what I'm doing is the date. So I don't, I'm not sure if other trustees would like to have a say on the date. But for me, anytime before the board meeting is fine.
Okay, so there's a motion on the floor by trustee Ellis to adjourn the meeting and to continue on a date to be decided by the agenda planning committee before the board meeting.
Yes.
And I guess this is technically what a deferral, I guess, or something like that, executive officer?
I believe that it's a motion to adjourn, in which case it is put without debate.
Okay.
Projected, no second motion to adjourn may be made until another item of business has been dealt.
All right, so
Mr. Chair, on a point of order, I would respectfully disagree, because what we have is adjourned to a time.
I think trustee Scott, you're frozen again.
And I think it would be helpful for the agenda planning times next week, so we can arrive at a suitable thing.
Can you go over that again, trustee Scott? Because unfortunately, your internet cut out there.
Sorry about that. I think where trustee Ellis started was not just a straight motion to adjourn, which is not debatable, but it was a motion to adjourn to a time definite. And even though he is now allowing for some flexibility around that time, it might be helpful before we actually do adjourn to find out something about trustee availability, so that can give us an idea going into our agenda planning meeting tomorrow of which dates might work better for more people.
Okay, so let's start with let's start with our constraints with regards to other meetings, right? So just taking a look at the calendar here.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question?
Yes.
If we vote to have this continuation meeting, would it be possible to debate what I understand will be motions, perhaps one, maybe more than one to be debated. Can we debate it that night and not wait till board?
If people bring motions forward, then that's their right as trustees to bring motions forward. So
I see Executive Officer Giroux shaking her head because again,
Actually,
this sounds like a continuation of a
you're right.
discussion.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. If it's,
Continuation meeting, yeah.
The
a
bylaws have
continuation
two
meeting, yeah.
provisions. One is a provision to adjourn, which is what I explained, what Trustee Scott explained, was a provision to fix the time to which to adjourn. The conditions for that are slightly different. A motion to adjourn the meeting to another time and or date is regulatory. It suspends the meeting to another stated day or to later time on the same day. The proposed day must be such that there is no time to give notice for another regular meeting. If this motion is approved, the meeting takes an extended recess. No new items can be added to the agenda upon resumption because there was not time to give proper notice. Debate is restricted to amendments as to the stated time and dates. Approval is by majority of votes cast.
So we're gonna have another meeting and not debate proposed motion.
I believe that Trustee Scott was going to handle motions with regards to this at the board meeting, Trustee Blackburn.
I would be
That's what I
fine
believe.
with a commitment of having another meeting before the board to continue this discussion. I have a lot of questions. It's 10:30. I know other people's are asking to be put back on the list. I'm not going to get done with my questions in one go. So I'm just looking for opportunity to
Okay, so we have a
give this
budget meeting.
important item the attention that it deserves.
So Executive Officer, do we have any possible dates between now and the 21st?
Well, I certainly can't speak to people's availability, but there isn't a meeting scheduled on the 16th.
What?
There is not a meeting currently scheduled on the 16th.
16th.
I'll have to open the board calendar, sorry, to check.
So that's a possibility. And is the 10th a possibility?
I can't speak to people's availability on the 10th, but we do have a budget committee meeting tomorrow night. So that would be 3 consecutive nights of meetings.
I have a commitment on the 10th.
And the 14th?
The 14th, there is nothing on the calendar. We have budget committee on the 15th. So either the 14th or the 16th. I can't speak to anybody's schedule, but those are possible dates.
No, I'm just, as a first cut, Executive Officer, I'm just trying to not schedule meetings when we have other meetings is really what I'm just trying to do. And so those are it sounds like the 14th and the 16th are 2 possible dates.
I'll move my motion on the 14th and then others can speak to time and place. Or time and date.
So if the 14th is not good for anyone, put it in the chat. Trustee Lara.
If we're going to hold another meeting, would strongly prefer that we hold a meeting we can debate things at. That we can pass motions, that we can action items.
So understood, Trustee Lara.
The way
So,
to do that is not to fix the time to which to adjourn, but rather to adjourn the meeting and then convene a special meeting at the call of the chair or at the request of 6 members of the.
And I'm willing to withdraw my motion if I can get confirmation from the chair that that would happen.
So Trustee Scott, what do you think?
Sorry,
muted.
confirmation that what would happen?
That a special committee of the whole meeting with an agenda and that, so that motions could come forward and we could debate that, would take place.
If it's a special committee of the whole meeting, we would need to fix the agenda very quickly.
If it's a continuation?
If it's a continuation, then we just continue on with the agenda that we have determined already for this meeting. But I think that if it's a special meeting, that's a different thing. That's a new meeting, and we normally would call a new meeting for a specific purpose.
For the continued debate on this, move it into an action item.
So the question.
And we can continue the debate. I can ask my questions of clarification. We can do motions, and then the board meeting will go much smoother than having to debate motions.
The question that was asked Trustee Scott was, how would it be possible to allow for debate at the next meeting? And my response to that was to adjourn this meeting rather than continue this meeting and call a special meeting of the committee, either at the call of the chair or upon the request of 6 members. In which case, what is unusual about this particular case is because this is a discussion item, there hasn't been any deliberation, so there's no debate to pick up where it left off. If it's scheduled, if the will of the committee is to have a meeting where there can be a debate on this item prior to the board meeting, then I suggest you convene a special meeting for that purpose, rather than continuing this meeting. And then you would still have the procedural hurdle of having to change the structure of the meeting to allow for debate.
So what is your motion, Trustee Ellis, then?
Okay, so there's no commitment to call a special meeting. So I'll go ahead with my motion and hope it passes.
Motion to call a special meeting for the 14th to
Continuation of the meeting for the 14th.
Oh,
I don't believe you can move a motion to compel a special Cal meeting.
I have a procedural question.
Go ahead, Trustee Lyra.
So I know that with the written permission of 6 trustees, we can call a meeting whenever we'd like. Is verbal assent at a meeting the same thing as written permission? Or so if 6 people agreed now to call a special meeting, could we do that?
You can indicate your desire to do that, but the rules don't contemplate you doing it this way. The written submission still has to occur. Remember that there's no authority in the bylaws for that to be done by way of motion, and there's no action item on this agenda. So you can indicate your willingness to do that. Practically, you can achieve it, but you still need to follow through in writing following the meeting, just to confirm it, or the chair can call the meeting if it's the will of the chair.
We do have Trustee Ellis's motion on the floor to continue the meeting on the 14th, to adjourn the meeting and continue it on the 14th.
Yeah, let's call the vote.
Okay. All those in favor of adjourning the meeting, continuing it on the 14th? And opposed? And that passes. And so with that, the meeting is adjourned, and we will meet in agenda planning tomorrow to plan out the continuation meeting for the 14th.
Mr. Chair?
Thank you. Yes.
I do have a question about notice of motion provisions, I gather, which would be for board at this point. When do motions have to be in for?
Executive Officer?
Motions for board have to be in by the, I'm going to say the Thursday prior to the meeting. Manager Guthrie confirmed that board. It's slightly different than committee.
Yes, the Thursday prior to the meeting.
Thank
The
you.
post of the, sorry, I can get you the date.
That's,
17th.
if you could also.
The
have some-
17th, Trustee Campbell.
Thank you very much. And anything budgetary which may be related to this would go to budget, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone, and we'll talk to you on Wednesday or